Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting. Please stand and join us for a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. All right. The board just convened from executive session, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Exemption 6, and Mass General Law, Chapter 214, Section 1B. We're now in regular session. We have a busy agenda this evening. Review meeting and approve previous meeting minutes from regular session. We have invited guests. We will be swearing in Police Officers Kara O'Connor and Police Officer Ian Borowski. We have a discussion regarding Mendon Street and Pleasant Street, stop signs that will be installed, new stop signs I should say. Also discuss the RFP on the town center. Under discussion items, we have an appointment to the steering committee. We have to execute the grant of a conservation trail easement by the town of Upton. We have a road race that we need to approve for the Tri-Valley Frontrunners. We have to execute presidential primary warrant, and then we are going to be reviewing the beginning of our budget, which would be police, fire, town accountant, and town manager. Town manager's report. We have new business and several look-ahead topics. All right, so we begin by, again, we're going to skip over the meeting minutes. Okay. All right. We're going to move on to article, or item, I should say, 4.1, swearing in of the police officers. The town manager, board of selectmen, and the police chief are proud to our two new hires, our two new appointments, so I'll turn it over to Chief Bradley.
Thank you. I'm happy to introduce two of our newest police officers tonight that have been sworn in and have a badge pinning ceremony. So first I'll introduce Kara O'Connor. Kara, if you could step forward here. Of course, going to swear you in shortly. Kara is a resident of Auburn and a member of the Massachusetts National Guard, serving as military police officer for the past 4 years. She graduated from the Military Civilian Police Academy class at the Worcester Police Academy on January 10th. On January 20th, she started her in-service training, which is a 12-week program with our officers, learning the ins and outs of the job here in Upton. So if I could have Kelly come forward and administer the oath.
I'm going to have you facing this way, that way I can watch it. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Kara O'Connor.
I, Kara O'Connor.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully.
That I will faithfully.
And impartially.
And impartially.
Discharge the duties incumbent upon me.
Discharge the duties incumbent upon me.
As a patrol officer.
As a patrol officer.
For the town of Upton.
For the town of Upton.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my ability.
And understanding.
And understanding.
Agreeably to the rules.
Agreeably to the rules.
And the regulations.
And the regulations.
Of the police department.
Of the police department.
The Constitution.
The Constitution.
And the laws of the United States.
And the laws of the United States.
And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
And under rules, regulations, and bylaws.
And under rules, regulations, and bylaws.
Of the town of Upton.
Of the town of Upton.
Made under the authority thereof.
Made under the authority thereof.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. If I could have her family come forward to pin her badge.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Next, Ian, if you step forward. Ian is a resident of Mendon and a graduate of Blackstone Valley Tech. He also currently serving the Massachusetts National Guard as a military police officer. He also graduated from the Military Civilian Police Academy class at the Worcester Police Academy on January 10th and started his in-service training or his field training here in Upton on the 20th. So Kelly, if you come forward.
You have previewed, so, you ready? Raise your right hand. I, Ian Pawlowski,
I, Ian Borowski,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully
that I will faithfully
and impartially
and impartially
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
incumbent upon me
incumbent upon me
as a patrol officer
as a patrol
for
officer
the town of Upton,
for the town of Upton,
according to the best of my ability
according to the best of my ability
and understanding,
and understanding,
agreeably to the rules and regulations
agreeably to the rules and regulations
of the police department,
of the police
the
department,
Constitution,
the Constitution,
and the laws of the United States,
and the laws of the United States,
and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts,
and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts,
and under rules, regulations, and bylaws
and under rules, regulations, and bylaws
of the town of Upton,
of the town of Upton,
made under the authority thereof,
made under the authority thereof,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Lost the muffin. Get your badge.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I also want to take a moment just to recognize our field training officers who will put a lot of work and effort into making sure they have the skills and the knowledge to be successful. Detective Benjamin, who's not with us tonight, he manages the program for us. And we have 3 of our field training officers here, Officer Foxon, Officer Mansfield, and Officer Rankin. So they're in good hands. So thank you.
All right.
Very good. Thank you.
Would you like to do a photo, group photo? Did you want to do that? I would like to, yeah. It would be good. New officers maybe in the middle?
Sure.
We could do that? So I can on this side? Yeah, that might be best. Yeah, actually.
Yep.
I know.
Get closer, a little closer, a little
So bad, in our gallery. Appear to be in shape.
I'll leave it to you. Make sure we got it.
I'm gonna take the TV up there. We got you. Oh, we got you twice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
We go outside and take some more pictures.
Congratulations, folks.
Yeah, congratulations.
Not so loud. I know. All right. Okay. On to the agenda. Under invited guests, agenda item 4.2, Mendon Street and Pleasant Street residents regarding the intersection. A few weeks back, the board had approved the installation of 4 stop signs, solar-powered, be illuminated, flashing. So we thought we'd take a moment to invite any guests or neighbors that may have any concerns regarding that. Seeing none. Is there anything we need to add, Derek?
No, Dennis Westgate has stated that Upon tonight's approval, he'll order the stop signs. They'll be in within 3 to 4 weeks, and they'll go up immediately thereafter. So I'd say early to mid-March, we should see stop signs.
Okay, so we're right on our schedule for the 15th. Okay. Very good. Moving on. Agenda item 4.3, discuss the RFP on the town center. We had a discussion a few weeks ago regarding this, and over the weekend, of course, we received the rough draft for the RFP that's going to be sent out on the public central register for tomorrow, correct? All right, and Mr. David Ross is here this evening?
Yeah, Dave Ross, Chairman of the RFP Committee. Couple of the members of the committee are here. Steve Johnson, Catherine Warsham, Elizabeth Warsham, our youngest member, not of voting age yet, and Maureen. So as Chairman Matillion said, the plan is to release the RFP, the long-awaited downtown RFP, tomorrow at noon. The people that register on the town website to receive that package will have until Friday, April 3rd to respond, giving them approximately 60 days, at which point the committee will evaluate those responses, do in-person interviews with our 3 to 5 top respondents, and then hopefully mid-May to early June have a successful respondent to bring forward to the board. Last week, the RFP committee voted on a final draft that was forwarded to the Board of Selectmen, I believe, on Tuesday of last week. That draft has also gone through town council review, and we received that feedback from town council yesterday. The RFP committee met last night, incorporated a handful of changes from town council, so I'll quickly go over those to what's different from what was in the draft. So I put the changes in 3 main categories. The first category was there were just a number of grammatical errors, corrections that town council made. Things such as when we reference the town, we need to capitalize the T in town, and stuff like that, and some word choices. The next big issue was we've put in the RFP language around a land development agreement, so an LDA. The RFP will not require any respondent through the RFP to enter into the LDA, but we're putting language in the RFP that says once the successful respondent comes forward to the board to negotiate the final agreement, part of that agreement will be a LDA. So this land development agreement is a legal way for us to make sure whoever the successful respondent is moves forward with the project downtown. One of the concerns we have is we award their project to somebody, they acquire the old church and the parking lot from us, and then they sit on it. And what we have across the street right now remains there for 5 years and nothing happens. Because once the town transfers ownership of that property, it is now a private development. And nobody wants that. We want to see development happen. So the way that the LDA would be crafted, and there'll be a sample in the RFP so that respondents can see it ahead of time and know, okay, agreeing to this, is that they will bond for the project, and they have to be making substantial progress within 24 months. And if progress isn't being made, there will be a couple of different remedies that the town could pursue at that time, which could require taking the land back, or potentially working with the bonding agency to find a different developer to finish whatever construction may have started or not started. And there may be another one where it's more of a mix where the town doesn't acquire the property, but it acquires the funds for the bonding, and we go back out and do that. So what's in the RFP now is merely a sample, but it is to tell folks this is what we plan to do when to enter one. The board, it's obviously within the board's right to negotiate the terms within that. But the committee, with town council's advice, feels this is the strongest way for us to guarantee that we don't have somebody present a wonderful picture, we all get excited, and either they're too busy with development, the economy turns, there's some factor, and nothing happens, and the project stalls. So that is one of the big changes that was in there. And then the other change from what the draft was, in the draft, we had included a total of 5 parcels in there. We're bringing it back to the original 4 parcels that we had talked about. There had been discussion with the private owners of one of the parcels, 8 Grove Street, to include that in there. The private owners decided not to include that in this parcel, and it brings it back to the original 4 parcels that we had started with. I actually think it makes it a simpler project. That other parcel was nice to include, but if we think about the geography down there, the brook cuts between that parcel and the other 4, so it wasn't necessarily contiguous. It was a little bit of a variance there. So I think removing that removes a little bit of complexity from the parcel. And then just one other date to keep in mind: on Thursday the 20th, the RFP committee with the town manager will be hosting a site visit for anybody that's interested. So it's open, it's a public meeting, it's open to anybody, but it's geared towards potential respondents to the RFP to come out to meet with members of the town. The board is welcome to come. I think it might be helpful if there's at least one representative from the board there, if not 2 or 3, where we will explain the process, the town's vision, because the scoring of the RFP, 25% of it is adhering to the town's vision for downtown. It's the largest component. So it's our chance to really verbalize that vision, explain it, as opposed to just what's in a couple of pages here in this report. And then, weather permitting, we would allow folks to go actually walk the property, be able to see it firsthand. It is not required for somebody to respond to it, but we thought it would be a good opportunity for potential developers who are not familiar with the area to come down, meet the town, see who they'd be working with, get to know them, and then also be able to see the property firsthand. I don't know if the board has any questions on the process, the RFP document itself, any potential edits. We specifically stated that we would be releasing it at noon tomorrow in case there is any small edits or changes. There will be time tomorrow morning to make those changes. Otherwise, the document will go live at noon, and we do have the ability through the procurement process to issue addendums throughout that time period. So if something material was to come up or a new piece of information on March 1st, we're able to release an addendum to that. And the one thing I would state, as Derek has brought up, for all of us to keep in mind, if we know a developer who is interested in the process, it is important that they go to the town website and register, because that's the only way we know who has the RFP. So if we do issue an addendum, we can make sure they get that information. So if you have a copy of it, don't forward it to a friend, because then if there's any changes to it, they won't have the latest information. So everybody should be getting their own personal copies from the website and not be sharing it around. I know we like to be friendly as a small town and just shoot it over to people to help, but the email should be, hey, you should go check this out and download there.
The previous date you were talking about is March 20th? That's
February 20th.
February 20th, which
February
is when there's going to be the, more or less like a
Yes.
meet and greet.
Correct, at 1 o'clock here at Town Hall. Yeah.
Very good. There were 2 items to the RFP that the Board of Selectmen needed to make some decisions on. One of them we were able to get through, the other one we have not been able to finish that yet, so we're going to have to go back into executive session after this evening's meeting and work on the second half of those questions. We should have that completed. As far as questions, is there any questions that anybody had before we talk about, before we talk about the purchase sale, transferable purchase and sale? Is there any questions regarding the RFP? I didn't have anything. Brett, did you have anything? Okay.
It's great. Tremendous amount of great work by a lot of people, so thank you.
Yeah, it's complex. There's a lot in there. The scoring process, I saw I did have a few questions regarding the scoring process, but I think we talked about it earlier, so I'm pretty comfortable with all that.
Yeah, I think the document itself is about 45 pages, and the online appendices, if you were to add all of those together, puts it probably close to 300 pages of information. So there's a lot of information to dig through. Also another reason for a 60-day response window.
Right, right. So the board had decided unanimously to enter into a transferable purchase and sale agreement regarding the other two parcels that the town doesn't own that need to be added to the RFP. So we're able to discuss that, decide on that. Now we need to talk about the other issue, which is whether or not there will be a minimum purchase price, or what the minimum purchase price will be on the town-owned properties. So we should have that answer, hopefully before the night's over.
Excellent.
We'll have that answer. So the RFP should be completed on schedule, and, hopefully we'll hope for the best from there.
And just to be clear, if I may, so
Yep.
this is signing a PNS that we can transfer to the developer, any potential developer. So the town's engaging in this PNS. It's $500, $1,000 total for the PNS on each of the two properties. And the parcel with the record store and the Nevermind shop on it there is a $400,000 purchase price. And then the parking lot, the gravel parcel next to it in the PNS is $150,000. So it's a total of $550,000 across each PNS, across both PNSs, and a total $1,000 deposit. It's important for people to know that the $1,000 is not refundable, but this does, otherwise the town is not committed in any way, shape, or form to any purchase, or we're not involved in the purchase, we're not going to purchase those parcels, there's no part of this plan that includes the town buying those two parcels. This is simply us holding a price so that people that are proposing to do a development know what they have to pay for those two parcels. So I just want to make sure it's very clear to everybody that the town is not purchasing those parcels of property.
Yeah, very well, yeah. Yeah, we're merely trying to facilitate the deal and try to
right.
move the deal forward, the project forward.
Yeah.
Really is ultimately the intention of all parties, really. So,
Yeah. Well, our committee appreciates that. It's a very proactive, progressive approach that the board's taking, and it eliminates that rather, it's a $500,000 question that is now off the table for potential developers. They know from day one, this is what that number is. They don't have to worry about negotiating it themselves. So
Right.
we appreciate that from our committees.
another key thing, I had a resident ask me about this just a few days ago. Another key thing that a lot of people probably don't realize is there is a significant period of time where the RFP will be open, and then there's also the grading and scoring process with which the RFP committee will make a recommendation. So you've got this period of time, and if those parcels were to sell in that period of time, your RFP would hold no water.
Yeah.
You couldn't act on it. So if you don't have the parcels with transferable PNS agreements in place, you have a couple of different ways to lose there. A developer doesn't know the values that they have to pay, and you don't have anything saying that they can't be sold in the short term.
That's another good
So I
point.
think based on those two reasons, it's important to certainly secure our
Great
interests.
point, yeah.
So, all right. So if there are any other questions, is there anything else that the board can answer for the committee?
No, I don't think so. So we look forward to hopefully getting a number of responses. From what we've been told to expect, that we may see a large number of people register in the first couple of weeks, but most people probably won't respond with their official response until that last week. So there's a little bit of a nervous waiting. If I come back in 45 days, I may say we have 0 respondents so far, and then they all come in days 55 to 60. So we'll anxiously look forward to that first week in April.
Very good.
Good.
No
Keep
other
us posted on how many people register.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, maybe halfway or three-quarters of the way through the process, maybe we'll ask you to come in for an update,
Excellent. Sounds good.
something along those lines. All right, very good, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, discussion items. Agenda item 5.1, appointment to the steering committee. We talked about a little bit about this at our last meeting. We have any, is there anything anybody would like to add? Otherwise, I will take a motion. Oh, actually, this was regarding the town's municipal center steering committee.
Right, so there were 2 seats that were going to be vacated, right? What's the recap?
Yes.
Can somebody recap what this is?
I guess there was 2 questions. Did we ever get we don't actually have an agenda item to accept resignation, so I don't think we ever got the resignations for that particular committee as of yet.
I can say that I have personally reached out to one of the individuals who we talked a lot about, who has stated publicly that they plan to resign. I asked them to just respond and say that they would no longer be a part of this committee, and they still have not received a formal resignation.
Okay. All right. So I think at this point in time, then, we cannot make this appointment just yet.
We just have to table
Right.
it.
And to be able to look back at the fact that I thought the appointment, when we changed the name, we stated that there would be, I'm trying to remember how we stated it. I thought
I think we
said
just
that
changed the name because we didn't want to have to go through the process of
Right.
creating a whole new board and appointing people and all of that. So I think what we said was just, I don't know, that's
No,
my
you're right.
recollection.
That's how I remember it.
Because I thought we had changed it and then we
Right.
were,
Right, we
with
didn't- no.
with 3 vacancies.
Yeah, we didn't dissolve that board and start a new one. We just changed the name technically, so.
Right, and then we adopted the other mission statement, the updated mission statement.
right.
But I think we're still waiting, as far as I recall, we're still waiting on 2 resignations.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Still haven't received them.
All right. So I don't,
Who are the 2 people?
Is it Dave O'Brien, right?
Which I made it clear that I'm resigning. I was going to.
Okay, so really it's just Dave.
could we, is that something we could address under new business? Maybe we can circle back to this, take care of that under new business, and then make this appointment at the end of the evening. That's something we may be able to do?
I mean, I don't see why, if Kelly wanted to tender her resignation verbally, it's on camera, or it's in public, why that would,
Okay.
I think that would be fine.
To create, and I actually mentioned it at the last meeting that I resigned and just never put it in writing because I thought.
Cameras weren't working.
Understood, so I apologize.
All right. Maybe someone should make a motion. We will accept Kelly's resignation, and then we will also make another motion, accept a new appointment. I think that would probably be the best way to handle it.
I make a motion to accept Kelly McElrath's resignation from the board.
Second.
I make that unanimous action? All right.
And then
Back to,
Do we need to get a resignation from Dave, or can we? We do.
I mean, I have been told, anecdotally, that he's going to resign.
Right, but he has to formally.
And he told
I
me,
reached out to him myself, and I've asked him to send something.
just not to interrupt, I sent him 3 emails and he told me verbally that he's resigning. And I asked him to send us.
okay. But as of right now, we do have 1 open seat, so we can make this appointment. Correct?
We do now that Kelly has resigned, and you've accepted her resignation, yes. Yep.
So we can work on that for the next meeting. I don't recall the first name, the last name was Howland?
John Solomon.
Solon, okay. All right, any discussion regarding appointing John Solon to the steering committee?
None for me.
Nope.
Okay. Someone like to make a motion?
I'll move that we appoint John Solomon to the steering committee.
Brett?
Second.
I make that unanimous action. All right. Congratulations, John. All right. Moving on to 5.2, execute the grant of conservation trail easement by the town of Upton. This is for the Conservation Commission. I believe they negotiated this. This is a trail easement granted by D&F Alfonso Builders to the town of Upton. This is regarding several properties that are along Chestnut Street. I believe it's kind of right before the railroad tracks, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's, the property was owned by Blackstone Valley. It's donated to Blackstone Valley Parking Tracks. Blackstone Valley was going to develop a recreational facility there. And but that wasn't feasible, so they ended up auctioning off the lots. Alfonso's company purchased them, and they're developing several house lots on the property. On one of the house lots, the Conservation Commission asked for a trail easement that would go from Chestnut Street to basically up the state forest land and back. That up the state forest parcel is otherwise landlocked. So, and that's what this easement is.
Okay. Is that closer to the railroad tracks, kind of near that
It's on
swampy area?
It's on that side.
Okay.
Towards the railroad tracks.
Okay, so it wouldn't be at the beginning of the parcels, let's just say closer to Route 140, it would be closer to the railroad tracks?
Yes.
Okay,
That's correct.
all right. And do you have plans of marking that so that it's,
Eventually, yeah.
Okay.
No definite plans right now. It would, again, at this point, mainly used to access parcel of the state forest. There is, on the other side of the street, on Chestnut Street, Harvey Trask will some property to the trustees of other nations. So it's possible that, in matter of fact, the Conservation Commission has had some preliminary discussions with the trustees about someday, if they do obtain that property, about posting a trail on the side of Chestnut Street, which would go probably from Walker Drive, 140 Walker Drive to Chestnut Street, and then further.
so essentially you'd be able to walk all the way from Walker Drive through the woods, cross over Chestnut, and then get into the state forest?
That's correct.
I see, okay.
That's the
Interesting,
vision.
okay. Very good. Any of the board members have any questions for Mr. Penko? None?
Now, do you have a map?
I don't have really plan reference to.
Trying to see what's that in the,
There was no attachment of the map. That's why I was curious whereabouts in that,
It's along the edge of the house lot.
and where will the access be from?
Chestnut Street.
From Chestnut Street. Is that going to be marked or delineated, or, because I think a lot of times we accept these trails and they never get used, there's no access, there's issues with people doing different things on the properties, so how do we make sure that the town knows either publicly or on the website or via a marker where exactly this trail goes and how exactly to access and egress it?
Well, I guess for this property, at some point, we could put up a small kiosk, not a very large kiosk, with a trail map right off of Chestnut Street. And the trail itself, not all of our trails, but many of our trails are marked by blue lagoon and hiker markers. I don't know if you've seen any of those in the woods, but so potentially something like that could be done. The commission has a subcommittee called the Land Stewardship Committee, and that committee, I'm on that committee too, but that committee typically implements, the development of the trails, maintains the trails. We've got a lot on our plate, so I'm not sure when this will happen. It's probably better, though, that it happens sooner rather than later. The house, I think, is being constructed to have the trail in place, maybe ideally before even someone moves in. So it's there and everyone understands what's.
So it's not is it an existing trail?
No, it is not.
No, so somebody's going to have to go in and make a trail. And that's the Land Stewardship Committee that does that?
Yes. Possibly the kiosk could be a Eagle Scout project. Quite a few of the kiosks we have in town have been Eagle Scout projects.
Has someone in that committee been part of the conversation to go clear that? I know.
Yes, Bill Taylor is on that committee. I'm on that committee. And Bill actually was the lead. He couldn't be here tonight. He was actually the lead on this easement.
Okay.
And we're aware of
Yeah. What's the width of the easement?
15 feet.
15.
I think that's a good point. If could at least be marked and maybe the very beginning of it cleared before the house gets sold and residents moved in, it would be a whole lot less impactful than it would be after the fact. So I don't know if that's something that can be discussed at the next meeting.
Something we can try to do.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, is there off-street parking, or is someone just going to be able to park on Chestnut Street?
It would be parking on Chestnut Street. And potentially, though, if people are, if a walker drive trail is ever established, from Walker Drive through the TTR land, people would just cross the street. It could potentially be parking someplace off of Walker Drive.
But a lot of people ride their mountain bikes through these kind of trails and they just are walking around town and go on the road and off the road and like they do at the state park or the state forest, up off of like West River Street and all that.
It might be used by just the local residents.
Yeah.
One thing that we do try to do is think about having walkable open space, close to as many people as possible, so they don't have to drive someplace. They can just, walk a quarter mile down the road and get a trail.
Right. Even the people in that neighborhood, right, just crossing onto their neighbor's property is not something you could typically do, but if you know there's an approved trail there, you might take the kids and go walk around the half-a-mile trail, so it's great.
Very good. If there's no other questions, I will take a motion.
I move that we accept the grant of conservation trail easement from B&F Alfonso Builders Incorporated off of Chestnut Street.
Second.
I make that unanimous action? Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, discussion item 5.3, Tri-Valley Frontrunners Road Race. This is an annual road race put on by Tri-Valley Frontrunners. It is scheduled for Sunday, April 5th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., beginning at Nipmuc. I believe it runs down Mendon Street, down South Street, in through Northbridge, back through West River or Moon Hill Road, West River, and back to Mendon Street and back to the school. About a 9.5-mile loop, according to the application. So, any questions or comments? I'm usually not that well prepared on these road races.
I'm not going to be in that one. 10 miles.
9.5 miles.
Oh, that's great.
I'm out on that as well.
No, I'm good.
All set?
Same here.
All right, I make a motion that we approve the application for the Tri-Valley Frontrunners Road Race.
Second.
Make that unanimous action? Agenda item 5.4, we need to execute the presidential primary warrant. That is to be scheduled on, let's see, the primary is Tuesday, 3rd day of March. It's coming up pretty quickly, just a month away. So the presidential primary. Any questions or comments? Okay.
Well, I would hope so. So, are you gonna make the motion, or are you just gonna?
We're waiting to see if you had anything to add to
Oh, I'm
the
sorry, I
agenda
missed
item.
No,
You came up so
Well,
authoritatively.
she handed those to me, so, no, it's just the primary is March 3rd from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Nipmuc Regional High School. On the other note, we will be having early voting from February 4th to February 28th, I believe is that Friday. So during the time that the town hall is open, so people can vote early the week before, as well as the day of the primary. And the really good news is Nipmuc High School, or the Regional School District, is doing a professional development day. So the good news for Nipmuc is parking should be much easier because we don't have all the students there, just the staff. So I want to do a shout out to the Regional School District for planning a professional development day to help with that.
Very good, very good. And the early voting is the week leading
Yeah,
up
it's
to
the
it?
Monday, Friday before March 3rd.
Okay, so there's no early voting on the Monday before the
No,
Tuesday?
no. I need
What-
some time to get some paperwork done.
What's the date? I thought you said February 4th, but that can't be right. You say the 20th?
24th.
The 24th.
I
okay.
believe it's the 24th through the
Gotcha.
28th
Okay.
is that week.
Got it.
So anyone that wants to vote early and take advantage of that, they just need to come into the town hall during normal business hours. So on Tuesdays, we'll be there till 6, and Friday, at least till 12.
Okay.
All right?
Very
You
good.
can
We've
sign
got
up, we
all-
can get that posted.
I make a
I will-
motion that we approve the presidential primary warrant for March 3rd, 2020.
Second?
Make that unanimous action? Very good. All right. Agenda item 5.5, budget review. Chief Bradley, police, I believe, is first up.
We're going to start with Kenny, if we could. He's going to give us a 40,000-foot view of the FY21 budget,
Okay.
and then roll into his budget since he's already there, and then move to Chief Bradley.
Okay, that's fine. So you want to just go, so we'll just change the town accountant in front of police, but we'll do everybody else in the same way.
Do my budget last.
Do the 5-minute presentation, and then when they're done with questions, we'll just do your mic.
Yeah, yeah. That should take like a minute.
Yeah, well, that's why I figured you're already sitting there, so.
Yep.
Good evening, Kenny Costa.
Good evening.
How are you?
So before we do begin, I just want to mention again, the year 2 of the budget document. As you see, we're building upon previous editions. Kenny has committed his time and energy towards developing a budget document that meets the GFOA standards. We're not quite there yet, so we're thinking maybe a year or two away before we can submit to GFOA to receive their Gold Star approval. And as you can tell, this is a multi-page, 100-page document, and not only Kenny, but Sandy and Kelly's effort burning the midnight oil trying to get this document. I do apologize. It was a week late. We had a number of technology glitches that held us up a week, but again, we continue to try to be as transparent as possible and provide as much information as possible in all of our budget documents. So with that being said, I turn the rest over to Kenny.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. As Derek mentioned, we're building this document. It's just getting better. The goal is to submit this document to the GFOA for their Distinguished Budget Award. So we're a few years away. So on page 7, there's an introduction. This is new from last year, where there's a citizen's guide to the budget process, the community profile. It just gives you a little introduction to the budget. This is something that I've noticed in other communities, other budgets. So we won't go through every page, but I just wanted to let you know that introduction. I'll just move over to page 10. This is the revenue estimate. And as you can see, the largest revenue source of the town is property tax, which is 88%. And the local receipts, 8%. For example, motor vehicle excise, building permits, electrical permits, those are types of local receipts. We'll get into that later, but I just want to give you just kind of a general idea of what each revenue type is. And state aid is 4%.
I was very surprised at the number of excise tax receipts.
Yep.
I know you said it had been a bump up this year, but I was very surprised at the number. It was over $1 million.
Yep. Yep, there's been a steady increase. There's a nice chart later in the presentation that shows a nice steady incline of revenue, which is exactly what you want to see.
Okay.
You don't want to see a roller coaster of anything, of revenue or expenditures. Generally, that's a red flag, that's a concern.
Okay.
And I want to point out, so this mix of revenue, if I went to last year's budget, it's the exact same. It's the exact same pie chart. So the percentages have not changed. So, move on to page 11. So state aid, as you know, the state, they give money to the town, and they also taketh money away as well. And the largest revenue in the pie chart, as you can see, is the unrestricted general government aid. Essentially, this is the lottery money that the state takes in. So that's by far the largest. Next is for education, which is 24%. And then there's veterans, and then there's state-owned land, and then there's also the exemptions for veterans and blind. So those are the revenues that have come from the, from the state. So.
It looks like that number's up as well, right? The state.
Correct.
the
So
state-
at the time when this budget was being constructed, we didn't know the governors. So what we did was we took last year's, just to be conservative, but there is a slight increase of about $14,000. But then again, it could still change as it goes through the House, and then through the Senate, and then the Ways and Means Committee. So I'd prefer to wait and see what the final number is if we want to make an adjustment. If the state is, if they'll make sometimes they've done that, they'll come forward and they'll say, okay, these are the final numbers for state aid, so each city and town, they can budget for it. But I would say, right now it's $14,000, maybe slightly it could get better, but at this point, I think $14,000, I don't think there's a need to change the budget on a $24 million budget. But I do want to let you know, at the time, we didn't have the governor's budget. We didn't have his numbers at the time, so we didn't know.
Okay.
So from fiscal year 20 to 21, as you can see, there's about $44,000 increase from the prior year, which is about a 5% increase. And then on page 12, we'll get into education aid. So it'll show, it's a nice, from fiscal year 11 to 21, it'll give you a nice little chart. It shows the, the steady increase in aid, but we're talking from $25,000 to $35,000, so that's a $10,000 increase in education aid. On page 13, the unrestricted general government aid, as you can see in fiscal year 11, $400,000, and now we're slightly over $500,000, $565,000. As you can see, there's been a steady increase, but revenues from the state has been pretty, flat. There hasn't been a huge increase, but that's good. At least it's trending the right way. It's trending up.
On all of the charts, but definitely on the general government aid, that particular one is up pretty good.
Yes. Yep. And again, that's the lottery money. Maybe in the future, I don't know, with maybe with the casino revenue or something, maybe there might be some increase later at some point, but right now, I would say we should be conservative. We're exactly where we should be. There's some other small revenue items. I'm just going to jump into property taxes, which is on page 14. And obviously, this is the largest revenue item. This is 88% of the pie of the revenue that comes into the town. So the chart shows you fiscal year 20 and 21. So right now in fiscal year 21, we know what the prior levy limit is. So essentially, that's our base. We know the 2.5 automatic increase, so as everybody knows, Prop 2.5. There's a nice, we've talked about this in the past, there's a nice primer on 2.5. It's about a 30-page document. You could pretty much spend a day reading that and still be confused. There's a lot of different terminology. But essentially, you'll find a similar chart like this in that document that goes through every item. So the next one is, like I said, the Prop 2.5, which is 508,000, it's slightly up from the prior year. And then new growth, at this point, it's still too early to tell, we're estimating 250,000. A year ago, it was 363. That it was the actual number, so at this point, we don't know, but the concern is, let's say we want to make this, 350, but let's say the number comes in, now we're in a deficit, we're short. So you always also want to be conservative with this number, you don't want to go too high, because if you do go too high, and you have to decrease that number once it's certified by the state, then you'll either have to find that revenue from another revenue source, or you'll have to make some painful cuts to the budget, which I don't recommend. You don't want to do that.
In the last couple of years, how much do you see that move? I know the 250 is the estimate, 363,000 was the actual for last year. What did it look like 5 years ago? Was that number 200? What do we see for an actual number?
I can actually give you the real number if you'd like.
I'm just curious how much it moves. The actual?
Accountants don't like to estimate numbers.
Not at all. I don't want you to hold me to it as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any time to look it up yourself,
If it's difficult to find, I can get it from you later.
I'm actually on the website. It's actually refreshing. Here we go. So in fiscal year 15, it was $92,000.
Really?
Yep.
It's gone from 92,000 to
A lot of new growth.
363.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
That's
Big
growth.
number.
It all
Definitely help
depends
managing that growth.
on how much building you have.
Money.
You remember the last couple of years, we took on the project down on Plain Street, Cranberry Gravel, whatever that one was.
The Crosswinds. That's Crosswinds, and of course we had Rockwood Meadows.
You got the job up at Amato's.
Yeah, Rockwood Meadows was the big one.
There was 2 years, almost 3 years, new growth involved in that. So basically, it's, ask the planning board, ask the building department how many permits are out there, what they see, and then you can say the number.
It's like 4 or 5 pages.
Yeah.
So fiscal year 14, it was 157,000, and then in fiscal year 15, it was 92,000. So there was a little bit of a drop. But again, if it's $92,000,
We've got a
we're going to have a problem.
Right, okay.
So we'll have a $150,000 problem. I mean, I'm not seeing that based on the revenue that's coming in for building permits. I don't anticipate that, and I know, the Board of Assessors, they're very conservative with their number. So, so I feel good about the number. But just to give you, so you can
Yep.
see 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's why I
where it
asked, I was
coming.
curious how much that number moves.
So, once we plug in the new growth number, then we have the new limit, which is 21.1 million. And again, that's just an estimated number, just like new growth. Debt exclusions, that's 557,000. As you can see, there's a decrease, and that's to Stefan's Farm. That's going to be paid off in fiscal year 20. And then also the fire station as well. That's being paid off. So that's about 373,000 that's coming off the town side. So that's why you see such a drastic decrease from 940 to 557, because we have debt coming off the books that's related to debt exclusion. So the difference between a debt exclusion and an override is a permanent increase, and a debt exclusion, it's a temporary increase. So once the debt's paid off, it comes off. And this is the example. This is an example showing you how that debt peels off and it comes off.
And just to be clear, this is the number that will go back up if we approve the community center. That would go in as a debt exclusion and bring this number back up. So this is sort of the down in anticipation of
Yep.
a future investment.
Correct.
Just so
Yep.
people know this number goes up and
Yeah.
down based on how you
Yeah.
invest in.
Yeah, and that proves to everybody how that would work with the debt exclusion. So if you would add that on, it's a temporary increase, and once it's paid off, this is proof that it's coming off the books with the fire station and stuff in this farm.
Yeah.
So that debt's been completely paid off, and here it's coming off. So this is a perfect example showing that.
Right. And then something like the water line, the $1 million water line that we did, we may bond that, and that would be shown as, say, a 10-year pay down on that. We do
Yep.
that as a debt exclusion as well.
You could, yes. And that would be 50% to the general fund, or you can do 100% if you'd like. But usually any new water enterprise type of debt, it's usually a 50% to the general fund and 50% to the water enterprise fund. So there's a share of expense.
And I know this proposal doesn't include a 2.5 override for the Maytown meeting. Do we expect that to continue? Do we expect a revision to this, or where are we with that? I just want to make sure.
Relative to schools?
Relative to schools.
So right now, the schools, they're still, working on their final numbers. Based upon last year's commitment from the town, we thought it was a conservative approach to plug in 300,000. Now, that number could change. That could, look historically, looking back, it may go upwards, so we'll have to adjust accordingly.
Okay. So right
But
now,
there-
we've put a plug in here for an additional $300,000 of investment in the schools, and that gets us to an even 2.5%. So anything above $300,000 that the school budget asks for in terms of an increase, we'd have to figure out how to pay for that.
That's right. We'll have to find that in this budget somewhere. That's right.
We have to make cuts to this proposal.
Right.
So I suppose in the short run, it may look good now, but we don't know where we'll be in March or mid-April.
Right. And so the only two options at that point are make cuts or do an override.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Mr. Chairman, I've been to these school budget meetings, been 8 of them. The dreaded override is only mentioned at the last meeting, which was a week ago tonight. They're still trying to put all their numbers together, just like the town is. I believe at the next school committee meeting, which is Monday, I believe there will be a number that they will be looking for with the dreaded O word.
So something more than the $300,000 that would lead us to have to do an override or consider serious cuts to the budget, right? So those
Well, I think in
those are
last-
the two options. So.
Yeah, like say last
Just sort
year.
of prepare people for that, right? Like there's still conversation. So you look at this doesn't include any commentary or an override, a Prop 2.5 override.
Right.
But this isn't a final budget. We need to get the final budget from the school committee. Once we get that, we can figure out how to pay for it, and that will tell us whether or not the schools are requiring an override.
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, I'm in regular communication with the town administrator in Mendon, and, as the chairman would point out, typically Mendon would drive the bus on this, and our number that we had plugged in at 300 was really built upon what we were told by Mendon what they could afford. So I think we're at 55% of the budget Upton pays, and then Mendon covers the other 45%. So they're approximately around 270,000 is what Mendon had told me that they could afford, which is how we arrived at the $300,000 number. So I think that if the school district needs anything north of what Mendon has committed to, it may force either drastic cuts in Mendon or an override over there, which would then, we would then have to react to what's happening over there.
And it changes significantly from the governor's budget. I believe it then goes to the House and then it finishes in the Senate. So I think even with last year's school budget, which was impacted significantly by what the state does. And I think as the budget moved forward, there were more and more monies. We had Rep. Meridian in a few times and Senator Moore in a few times, and they've always kept us, done a good job of bringing us up to speed. And I think those numbers were favorable. And I think they're favorable in the preliminary state budget. It looked like it was favorable for the school district. So But again, who knows where we'll be in a month and a half.
Correct.
And so is it correct to say that if there is an override request by either Mendon or Upton, that both towns need to approve that for the school budget, because we sort of key off of each other? So in other words, if they don't approve an override, we wouldn't have an override. If they do approve an override, then we would have to approve an override, or is that not the correlation?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think that you have to have an override to find the necessary resources to fund it, but in some situations, there may be no other choice. So kind of override is like your last option, right? And, in this case, if Mendon were to have to, if their only option was to go towards an override, we would then have to have our conversations with the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, to determine whether or not we need an override to match the school's request.
Our 55%
Right, our
of what?
55%.
Okay, got it. So Mendon may have to do an override to meet their required
That's right.
sort of bill for the schools, and then we'd have to match the 55% of that and decide how we want to pay for it.
Right.
But it's not as though if they do an override, we have to do an override. We would need to do one.
Right.
We would just have to figure out how to make up that budget gap.
Right, so, right, exactly. So it could be an override, it could be drastic cuts, it could be, looking at our receipts and our revenues, as Kenny pointed out. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but ultimately, when you're moving towards an override, it's because you're looking at drastic numbers. You're looking at in the millions of dollars, which you're not going to find that within your budget.
Right.
There's something big, there's a big change.
Right. It sounds like there might be one coming from the school, so we'll have to wait and hear.
Now, last year, there was an increase, our contribution last year increased by $592,000, which was significant. It's typically somewhere in the $300,000 to $350,000 annually increase. I don't have the budget in front of me from last year, but are we $13 million? Is that our?
Correct.
I think it's right around 13, or maybe a little over.
We're at 13.7 million
Yeah,
for the school.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's both BVT and Mendon Upton Regional.
Okay.
And just, again, as a reminder, last year, the only way we were able to meet the school district's request last year is we were fortunate enough to have about $250,000 of excess levy capacity that we were able to raise. We have approximately $9,000 of excess capacity.
It's at the bottom of the page.
So that's not one of the options this year. That was an option that we were able to take advantage of last year, is going to the excess levy capacity. That's, of all the options I just pointed out, that's not an option this year because we only have $9,000 of capacity.
Yeah, 9,000 is all you have from last year. Yeah, and essentially that's rounding.
Do we ever invite the school committee to this board to talk about their budget and answer?
Not since I've been in town.
We haven't, yes.
Finance Committee.
Yeah.
So no?
That's a good idea, though. We should invite them in, perhaps next week, or in 2 weeks at our next meeting, or maybe just after that, we should invite them in and try to get a feeling of what the discussions are looking like as far as the budget.
I mean, I don't know if that's an unprecedented thing to do, but it certainly strikes me as something that would, conversation that would be worth having publicly.
They have an open budget meeting where their budget is presented. Their budget is a moving target until they have their open budget meeting. The night they have the open budget meeting, the committee will vote on the budget. Statutorily, they have to vote a budget 45 days before the first town meeting. And it's Mendon this time, isn't it? I think so.
I believe it's Mendon, yeah. Mendon's town meeting's
So they
in
have-
4 hours.
I don't have it, I have the budget calendar.
It's scheduled for Monday lunchtime.
And that's when they have their budget hearing. Maybe a week, 2 weeks before that, they'll come to the Finance Committee to make a presentation.
But those aren't publicized, those aren't televised for people to see and hear in advance.
No, but there is this open budget hearing that.
So they're televised?
All the school committee meetings are televised.
He's talking about a finance committee meeting. But is that,
No,
This
I
is a
said
combined
the open
meeting?
budget hearing.
yeah,
That's televised.
got it. And then is the meeting with the finance committee televised as
No.
well?
Generally not.
Got it. Okay. So the open budget hearing on February
March 9th.
March 9th is televised, so people can see and watch that school committee open hearing. And obviously, they can go to the meeting as well. Okay, sorry, I digressed a little bit, but I was curious about some of this.
Historically,
Yeah,
you get 25,
yeah.
30 people, if you're lucky,
No, I know.
just at this
Yeah.
open budget meeting.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering if we invite somebody from the school committee to come here just to get more people, generate more visibility into the conversation, but that's just me.
I think at a date after March 9th, I think that's actually a good idea. I think that's something we should do. I've always thought we should have,
The more conversation we can have prior to all of us sitting in town meeting, the better.
But just by way of additional information, these budget meetings started last September,
Mm-hmm.
and the superintendent was very enthusiastic about the way we presented the budget last year with these 2 or 3 minute vignettes that went on the webpage.
That was phenomenal.
And they're in the process, I'm sure, from the discussions I've had with Dr. Merzchek and Jay Beyer, that they're going to be doing that because they thought that worked quite well for us. All right. Now, to be all honesty, you want to go do a Nielsen rating, see how many people are watching your selectmen's meeting? Putting the school budget thing on any of these meetings, yeah, it's for the people that watch it, but you don't get enough people to watch it. Okay, that's my 2 cents. I understand you want visibility and all that, but I'll bet you there ain't 100 people watching this meeting.
well, we can worry about that more so in March, but I think we have a bunch of budgets we have to listen to, so I think it's a great conversation, but we can pick that up either at, later in the evening maybe. We can circle this back around, but let's see if we can get through.
I just want to add 2 more things on page 14.
Okay.
So if, just the override, just so that everybody would understand, just for informational, so if there was an override, it would go underneath new growth. So then it would be part of the limit. So that's why I just wanted to let you, there is no override, but if there was, it would go underneath new growth. It would be kind of categorized with new growth, because it would be a permanent increase. And the other thing I just wanted to also add is there's $150,000 budgeted set aside for any property tax abatements. So you can apply for an abatement. So we've set aside $150,000 for that. So, yep. And again, as Derek mentioned, the excess capacity is $9,227. That's it. Compared to about $250,000 a year ago. Okay, moving on to page 15. This is actually, this illustration here, this is actually from that primer 2.5, Prop 2.5 worksheet. It just shows you, and I'll just take it from the bottom, where the levy limit basis kind of gives you a visual without having the numbers in there. If you're more of a visual person, and you don't want to see the numbers, this is the chart for you. So just to see the base, and then you see the automatic increase to 2.5, then you see the new growth, then there's the override, and then that's the new limit, like that's the new base for next year. And then after that is a debt exclusion. And then you can go all the way up to your levy ceiling. So that's it for page 15. Page 16, now we're getting into local receipts. And as you mentioned, Mr. Chairperson, earlier, motor vehicle is our largest number. As you can see, we're budgeting $1,093,168 compared to $1,050,000 a year ago. As you can see, there's been a steady increase in motor vehicle excise, and that by far is the largest in the pie chart. There's also penalties and interest. So if you're late paying your real estate or personal property or your motor vehicle tax bill, there's an interest. So we're budgeting about $115,000 of essentially, late fees. We also receive a small pilot payment from the federal government for $186. We also collect various fees for $111,000. There's other departmental revenue of $522,000, like ambulance fees or ambulance receipts. That's part of the 522. There's license and permits of 160,000, which is, I mentioned earlier, like building permits. That's, one of the largest numbers. Court fines, and then investment income. So that's the mix of local receipts that the town brings in for just over $2 million. So we're estimating about 74,000 increase from the prior year, about 3.7, and with these local receipts, we're conservative. All the data that I've seen, I feel confident that we will bring in that revenue. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what else is in the other departmental receipts? Could it be, say, trash bag sales, things of that nature?
I have that outlined. I'm going to get, if you could just be patient
Oh,
just
sure.
a minute, there's an outline of what makes up that number. On page 17, motor vehicle excise, as you can see in fiscal year 11 to 21, there's been a steady increase. We're about 900,000 in fiscal year 11. Now we've been pretty much a steady base of over $1 million in motor vehicle excise at this point. Penalties and interest, as I mentioned, 115,000. So license and permits, that includes building permits, electrical, plumbing permits, also weights and measures, liquor licenses, and other various licenses for 160,000.
I just wanted to just mention the motor vehicle excise. If you look at that graph, you can see that it goes up and down. So it's not like it's a constant trend upward, which is why Kenny always tries to be very conservative, because you can see if you start to slip backwards like you did in FY18, now we have to find those dollars somewhere else in the budget. So again, this is why we do a lot of very conservative budgeting.
Yeah. You don't want to be short in this, and if it's over, it's a great thing, and that'll be part of free cash. It's not like we lose those funds, that we can use them later for another purpose. So just to kind of hit the high points, so page 18, I'll go right into your question for other departmental revenue. So if you look at number 8, other departmental revenue, the 260 includes trash bag fees, 215,000. I mentioned earlier the ambulance, 260,000. We have some intermunicipal agreements with the conservation agent for 23,000. Nursing services for 10, and then there's other various revenues for passport and cemetery burial revenue for 14,000. So we're estimating 522,000. And I would say from last year, the biggest increase is the trash bag fees. As you know, we went up on the fee, so I'm estimating 215 to help offset the cost.
Right.
And then just the last item, free cash. That's also a funding source, and which is a great thing. We're not using free cash to balance this budget, which is a great thing. As you know, free cash, it's one-time revenue, it's one-time funds. So to not rely on free cash it's a very good thing. It's an excellent thing. I do know some communities that do use free cash to balance their budget. Once you do it once, it's impossible at a later date to remove that reliance of free cash. So I think once you do it once, that it's difficult to reverse that. So
In the past, we used to always use free cash. Once a year, we would use that to make that $100,000 payment towards OPEB.
So the 100,000, that's part of the operating budget.
Right, it was moved from coming out of free cash basically to the operating budget.
No, so the 100,000 for the OPEB, it's actually built into this budget.
Right.
And not free
years
cash.
past, we had it as a separate warrant article.
Yes, maybe an initial, I think, and a lot of communities have done that. So initially using it, 100,000, whatever that amount is, to transfer over to the OPEB trust fund. But I think building into the budget, that way there it's a steady revenue source, because sometimes it can be depending on how good or how bad your free cash is. So you may not have the free cash, the ability to transfer it. Could be you could have a bad year with snow and ice. So far this year, we've had an okay year, but there's some years where you do need that free cash to offset your, for example, your snow and ice. You may not have that ability to transfer 100,000 from free cash to the OPEB trust fund. So building into the budget, that is better as far as having, and the rating agencies, they like to see that you've built that into the budget, because I think a lot of communities, I think when they first started with the OPEB, because OPEB has only been around, a little bit over 10 years, So I think a lot of communities, that's what they did. They would just, they would take, free cash and transfer that to the OPEB trust. But a lot of communities, they built that into their budget, and that would be best practice, is to do that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years. Been 2 years in budget.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions, I'll be moving to page 19. So as you know, we have revenues of $24.4 million. Now we have expenses of $24.4 million for a balanced budget. And as you can see, the largest expense is education, as we just discussed. I think it was 13.7. Yep, 13.7. So that's the largest expense in the budget. We also have fixed costs of 12%. And that includes debt service, pensions, health benefits, Medicare, unemployment, state and county charges. I mentioned, the state gives us money, they also take it away. That's the state and county charges that they charge us. There's also building and liability insurance, and also snow removal. So that's what we kind of built as a category for fixed costs, and that represents 12% of the budget. So the other percent, or the last remaining of the pie is town services, which is 32%. And that's police, fire, DPW, general government.
You said the receipts pie chart, that mix hasn't changed. Has this changed?
I believe it's about the same.
It's about the same. I think it's the same as last year.
I mean, it's certainly close. It wouldn't change
It was pretty
significantly.
close. I wouldn't say it's the same. If I do recall, there was a slight difference. Yeah, so town services last year was 31%, this year it's 32%, and fixed costs was 13%, this year it's 12%. Education was the same, at 56%. So I knew there was a bit of a slight change.
Yeah.
Not much. So moving on to page 20. So what we did in this pie chart, what we've done is we take the 24.4 million, minus out the education, and then you're just left with the town municipal expenses of 10.7 million. And we're looking at, essentially that's 46% of the previous chart. So we have 70% of wages, salaries, and employee benefits, which includes health insurance, pension, OPEB, salary-related type of expenses. That's 70%. So this is people. We're investing in people. That's what the 70% means.
Yeah, and this is an important pie chart to look at because, and Kenny and I went back and forth on this one a lot, because oftentimes they say, well, the budget's too fat, right? So he just, in this previous slide, mentioned that only 32% of our overall budget is on the town side, and then when you take that 32%, you break that down even further, you look at 70% of those dollars spent are just on our people, right? So when we start talking about cutting back on our budget, we're really talking about cutting services and laying off individuals, because, as you know, our people provide services. So it really, again, is a depiction of really how lean our budget is, and how we really have to prioritize where we're going to put our dollars and cents each and every year.
So 24% is ordinary, those are our vendors, 24% the ordinary expense, and then the 6% is capital outlay, and the largest expense you'll see in the police budget is a new cruiser, $55,000. So by far, that's one of the largest.
Okay.
Okay. So that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions. That's page 20.
Very good.
So page 21, back to the 24.4 million. This pie chart just shows you by type. So again, education, 56%, public safety, 14%, public works is 10%. By far, those are our biggest departments And you can see even employee benefits is 9%. So on to page 22. This is actually new this year. This just kind of gives you, again, a 40,000 foot level view of the entire budget. So you can see where all the revenues, where we're estimating them to come in, and down below, all the expenses where everything is going. So last year, we actually walked into the, into the budget with a 7,000 positive variance. This year, it's a balanced budget. So as you see, 24.4 million of revenues up top, and then expenditures 24.4. Page 23. Pension expense. So I like this chart because it shows you we're just under 400,000 back in fiscal year 11, and this year we're at 700,000. It's about $696,000 for pension, and that's general fund. That's also water and sewer employees. Also, to let you know, this does not include, as far as like the schools, this is not the teachers, this is not Minden-Upton Regional. That is paid by the state, part of the Mass Teachers Retirement System. So this is just the town when we're talking about pension.
I know that was one of their budget drivers last year.
Yep.
When the school did their budget presentation, they were talking about how and it's the same on our side of the ledger, we see it each year. Our Worcester County retirement bill goes up, usually $60,000 a year.
But their pension, though, their teachers, that's not paid by the district, that's paid by the state.
But it comes out of their budget, right? They
No.
make a payment.
So the only thing that comes, so the teachers are paid by the state, any of the administrative staff, they're part of the Worcester Regional, just like the town is.
Okay.
So that would be the portion, but it's not the teachers.
So that's just the administration side, not the
Correct.
actual teachers.
Correct. Yeah, so it's not the teachers, it's the administration. Yeah. But I just wanted that to be clear, so everybody knew when we're talking about pension, we're talking about just town employees.
Be a good question for the school committee is what percentage of their employees are paying to the Worcester County system, and how much of it is, as you said, the state teacher's pension. I wonder what that breakdown is.
Yeah.
Danny, that teaches what, that teaches that's only the teachers, the administration, cafeteria.
Correct.
The maintenance,
Yep.
all those people, that's all part of the
Worcester Regional,
Worcester
correct.
County retirement
Yep.
system.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, non-teachers. So just to keep it simple, teachers, Mass Teachers Retirement System, non-teachers are part of the Worcester Regional Retirement System,
Right.
to make it simple.
I wonder what that would be.
And then the next is debt service. So this is a picture of debt service. So I even actually used the same chart from last year just to show you from fiscal year 18 and to fiscal year 34. So in fiscal year 21, we're projecting $731,947 for all debt service, and that's general fund, community preservation, enterprise funds, water and sewer. The school debt, that's part of the assessment. That's not part of this. Debt can get a little confusing because there's different, as you would know, there's a lot of different types of debt, debt exclusion, and then there's also under the levy, type of debt.
Outside.
Outside of the levy, correct. Yes.
And just, Selectman Dwinell had asked a question about, in my transmittal letter, I mentioned tax levy debt and enterprise debt. In that number is CPA debt, as Kenny pointed out. So next year, we'll be a little more explicit and mention CPA as well, so it's less confusing.
Yeah, I always consider like the general fund and the community preservation as general government debt, and then the water and sewer being enterprise fund debt. So that's how I kind of, sometimes if you hear me say that, that's what I mean, because they're distinctly different. And to page 24, this is an illustration, you may recall this from last year. As you can see, there's a nice trend, or it's, essentially, it's almost like a roller coaster that so that's something that the town can look in the future, if there's a capital need, we can try to build that into the budget. Because as you can see, there's from fiscal year 18, we have 700,000 in general fund debt, and then, in fiscal year, 33 and 34, we're under 100,000. So, I mean, it's a great thing that a lot of debt's coming off, but, I mean, if the town needs to make, an improvement, or there's a capital need, in the future, there is room. There could be potential room, because there's so much debt coming off.
Right.
And
And that's
just if we could focus on that for just a quick sec. So this is where we have the opportunity to either, right, use this savings to reinvest in the community and infrastructure, which I think is a standard best practice that municipalities use, is you keep this number level so that you can continue to reinvest in the community. But this is also where you have the opportunity to save and lower taxes. If you wanted to lower taxes, this is where you would use that, by letting this debt roll off, let these payments roll off, and then not sort of re-upping the debt. So I just want to make sure people are clear
just want to
about
add,
how that works.
no, the big piece of that's coming off is the debt exclusion. So that it's not part of the levy. So obviously.
No, right. I'm saying outside of the levy, right? This is a number that you have to use to either reinvest in the town, right? Because this is significant, right? We're talking about potential of $8 to $10 million worth of borrowing that this amount of money that we're saving represents. And so we can either spend that $8 million to do a community center, or do the DPW, or invest in fields and recreation, or, work at the fire station or the police station, or whatever the infrastructure might be. That's the money that you've got to make those kinds of investments. And it's also the place where you would have to sort of do a gut check and make a decision. If you really wanted to materially lower taxes, this is the way that you would do it, is by not spending the money that you use currently to pay the debt.
The last 2 years, we have about 500,000 rolling off.
Right.
So in the last, from fiscal 19 until, fiscal 21, we have 500,000 rolling off of debt.
Right.
In debt payments, which represents about $8 million or so of borrowing. And so that's part of what people are thinking about with a community center is, hey, we can fund this community center by borrowing and going back to the payment level that we had prior to paying off all this debt.
Correct.
Right, so that's the idea, is that sort of a net level.
Yeah. There's two things there that are important notes. One is, people can't see it, of course, because we don't have the chart up, but we see it. There's a big drop in the chart.
There's a big drop.
So when you see that big chart, that represents, again, probably can't see it, but that represents, again, as Kenny said, the ability to make that payment, which, as you said, nets in around about an $8 million investment or a $7 million investment.
To not affect the tax rate is what it is. So you won't see a big steady decrease in the tax rate. To keep it
So
low.
those are the, what's hanging in the balance, so to say, is people have that ability to spend their money either way.
Yeah.
Choose to spend it or not.
And this chart proves that.
And I've mentioned it in the past, but, I always try to bring up best practices and DLS recommendations, and they do recommend that 5% of your operating budget be put towards debt service. So I think with this new number, we'd be less than 1%.
Yeah.
731 is our debt service this year?
The general fund, correct.
731,000.
So
And
sorry, sir.
so I was going to say, 731,000 is our debt service, and that is
Just the general fund.
So just the general fund.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is as a number. What is that as a percentage of the budget?
It's less than 1%.
It is, okay. All right.
So it is extremely low. I mean, in the past, historically, the town has paid cash, for capital items, which, is a great thing. But the question is, can you sustain it, for every capital purchase? Because the great thing is when you do pay cash for capital items, you're saving on the interest cost, and the borrowing costs. You're saving on all of that. you know, but,
Which is important, because we do have a very, typically in the last few years, we have a very good cash position, free cash position.
well, we can't afford an $8 million community center to pay cash.
Not yet.
Yes, not yet.
And just so, and again, I know we're throwing around a lot of numbers here, right? But is it the state recommended 5%?
Yeah, DLS.
So what is DLS? We don't know.
Division of Local Services.
So the state Division of Local Services recommends about a 5% of your budget going towards annual debt exclusion service, right, to service that debt.
They would recommend 5%. I would say that would be under the levy. You know, what they would recommend.
Yeah, right, fair enough. So 5% of our budget is $1.2 million, and even before this debt service rolled off, we were only at $700,000. So we're very conservative in terms of the amount of long-term capital investments we're making in this community. We're well below what the state recommends. I don't know what the average is across the state, but, you know, if we went from whatever, 700,000, I don't know what that is, it's, call it 3%, down to 1%, there's still a lot of, we're still well below what the recommended amount is, so it's
Right.
important to understand
Of
that.
course, and back in FY18, our budget was a lot less as well.
That's right.
So we were probably at maybe a $19 million budget back then. So we were
Yeah.
probably closer to the 5% back then. And as that's rolled off and our budget's increased, we've got that little bit of a gap there. But I think a lot of that too speaks to the fact that we're 95% residential. So I mean, it's a lot harder to shoulder that debt when we're so dependent on just individual homeowners. I think, unfortunately, I don't think that our community fits into that state model. That's just my opinion. I just don't, again, we're 95% residential, so it's.
Again, it's a recommendation by DLS, that's best practices. You know, some communities, they like to push it, maybe go to 6 or 7, and some communities, they say, you know what, I want to be at 3 or 4%. So it depends, because it also comes down to affordability. I mean, what can the budget afford?
Right.
You know, but they, like I said, they always do recommend 5%, so I know some communities, it's usually a long-range, like, goal to get to that 5%. So it depends on what you feel comfortable with. But I do notice out there, best practice is 5%. They do try to get to that 5%. Not in 1 year, but it could take 4 or 5 years to get to that 5%. But generally, that's pretty much, what everybody tries to do.
It's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, because if you don't borrow money or you don't take care of your infrastructure, you're going to have to pay for it in the end anyway.
It's true.
Just deferring it.
You should have replacement programs, maintenance programs.
Right. It's like deferred maintenance on a house, right? You can save yourself money over the 5, 10,
Yeah, and then
15
when
years,
they
but
fix it.
eventually it's not going to be pretty.
That's right.
The house or the bill to fix it.
Right.
So that's all I have for the overview, unless anybody has any questions.
I think that's it for now.
Okay,
I do have another question, but we'll take it offline.
okay,
Send you an email on it.
okay. Can we do my department budget? That's page 78.
All right. Let's do it.
Big money grab.
Yes.
Big money grab.
I have a big budget. Not really. So my office, it's a two-person office, both my position and my specialist. I mean, it's not even a 1 FTE. I think I've said this in the past, I said last year, maybe 0.7. I'm a 0.5, and I think Ann's about a 0.2. So the wages, it's a 2% increase from the prior year. On the expenses side, the audit, which is done by independent audit firm, accounting firm, it's flat $19,000, so no increase on that. The biggest increase is on the GASB 7475 OPEB. So OPEB now is an annual endeavor. Years ago, we were on a 3-year cycle, but now GASB, they came up with a new pronouncement, 7475. It used to be 4345. So now it's annual. Last year, we had an interim, like a roll forward, so it wasn't a full evaluation. So that was $4,000. This year, we're due full evaluation. So that's going to cost a little bit more, so it's going to be $7,000 for the full evaluation. And I can see the excitement in Sandy's. And Deb's here, Deb as well. It's another team effort.
It's a big team effort.
Yes, and thank you both. So that's the biggest increase, it's a $3,000 increase. I also have maintenance for Vadar, so annually it's $3,552 for the accounting software. And then I also have a small town accountant expense budget of $2,000. Paper, buying 1099s, the actual forms and postage. So my total operating budget is $75,783 for an increase of 5.38%. And the next item is state assessments. So last year it was, I actually kept it the same. Last year was $60,411. I'm keeping it the same at $60,411. I did see the governor's budget. There's a slight increase of $290. I'm not concerned about that, because that could still change. Because I know that's a moving number. Transfers out, we're budgeting $105,000. So we're budgeting, as you mentioned earlier, $100,000 for OPEB, and I can provide a little information about OPEB. As you know, we had the recent valuation as of June 30th. We have $666,000 of assets currently, and then this $100,000 will put it at $766,000, hopefully if it passes. The OPEB liability is $7.2 million. And so the net OPEB, so if you take the 7.2 minus the 666,000, we're at 6.6 million of a net OPEB liability. So as part of the valuation, they're recommending, so I know we're contributing 100,000, which is a great thing. There's no mandate from the state, like the pension, there's a mandate. So Worcester Regional, they need to be fully funded by 2035. That's a state mandate. There is no state mandate right now for OPEB. But the valuation recommends a $738,000 contribution. So and they recommended a $700,000 contribution a year ago as well. So, but what I'm seeing a lot of communities, what they're doing with OPEB, since there is no state mandate, they're doing the best that they can. They're contributing as much as they can. And they know there's a pension windfall, hopefully, in 2036 in our case. So in 2035 will be the last year. Not to say that in 2036, the $696,000 number will go to zero. I don't see that happening, especially because of the market, so especially investment returns, and plus there will always be something. So I don't believe that the number will go, whatever the number is in 2035 to go to zero. There will always be something. But that difference, I hear a lot of communities, the intention is to take that difference and contribute that to OPEB. So, but just to let you know, it's a great thing that we're contributing to OPEB 100,000, but the actual, they're looking at 738,000. That's what we should be contributing. So, and I know there's a lot of competing needs, we heard that tonight, between school, education. Would I love this number to be 700,000? Of course, but it all comes down to affording it, because we will have an OPEB issue down the road.
What is there's that 5,000, so you have that 105 in there. You said the 100 is OPEB, what's the 5,000?
Conservation.
Conservation.
That's the transfer for conservation.
Okay.
They currently have 27,000 in their trust fund.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if they included an article, but putting here with the transfer, we don't need the article. So I wasn't sure.
I didn't see an article.
Okay.
For that. We'll talk that offline.
Yeah. So with that 666,000, we've only funded just under 8%. So we're at a funded ratio of 7.9% for OPEB. And as you know, that's an unfunded liability. And our pension is also $9 million. $9 million some change. So between the two, it's about $16 million between pension and OPEB. That's our unfunded liability for both. So I just want to kind of give you a picture of pension and OPEB.
The payment that we make to Worcester County pension, we're funding that at the required amount that they're asking us, correct?
Yep. Yep. So you may see a different number slightly, it's $790,000, but that's if we break up the payments into two. So Worcester County Retirement, they give you a payment plan or an option. You can pay the whole thing on July 1st. There's a savings, and we've done that, I believe, the last 4 or 5 years. We've made that payment on July 1st. So you can save $13,000 by making that payment on July 1st versus making the payment on July 1st and then on January 1st. So I recommended that 10 years ago, or sorry, 7 years ago, to make that payment on July 1st. And, there was a cash flow issue. That's what the reason why I heard we didn't make that payment. But a few years later, we have. So we've been making that payment consistently now for about a good 4 or 5 years on July 1st because there's a savings.
Very good.
Yep.
With respect to that Worcester County retirement system, we picked up two retirees in the past 2 months. Right? You're going to have at least one in the upcoming year and maybe more. So the more they're paying out, the more they're paying.
I have a feeling we're going to hear a little bit more about that coming up probably in the next.
Last night I was looking at the report, at the OPEB report. I can see there's about 6 that could retire in the next 5 years. There's about 6.
Townwide.
So, yeah,
Townwide.
yeah, which is about 10% of your workforce. So it's something to think about. So, I mean, right now we're at 700,000. I can see this going up 100,000, a year.
Right.
We had 16 retire in 2 years.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Last year, we made motions to accept each of the individual departmental budgets. Do we want to do that? Whether or not we do it for each department, I don't know, but I was going to make a motion on Kenny's budget.
I think we wait till the end of the evening, maybe? You want to wait till the end of the evening, or what do you think? I mean, till the end of, when we hear, are you done, Kenny?
Yes, I am done,
You are-
unless you have any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, last year we went through each department and approved each department, but whatever, I think it's easier to do it that way, because then we sort of say like, okay, we're done talking about this, we don't need to talk about this, we don't need to talk about this, but yeah, we need to talk about this.
I mean, I think we can, but it's more or less a short-term decision, because if we don't know exactly what's happening with the school and we have to find money in the budget, we do have the authority to reopen any discussion regarding any part of the budget. So if you want to approve it now, we can do
Right, it
that.
doesn't lock us in, right, so I don't know, what's the value of and the cost, the value of doing it and the cost of not doing it?
The value of doing is if we won't require the department head to have to come back a second time because you wanted to reopen and debate their budget. So if there was a specific department you wanted to hold something, I would understand that, but in the case of like Kenny's, quite frankly, I don't see anything that's you'd want to reopen for, so if you were to approve it tonight, then we wouldn't ask Kenny to come back to debate his budget again.
Right, I guess there's not anything in here that we could debate, right? It's not like there's a big investment or
Right.
spending or,
Right.
It's pretty lean.
it's pretty. But Steve, to your point, right, we don't want to make a commitment on some of the larger or more variable budgets because until we have a finalized budget, we might go back and have to pull money back out of something, so.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
no, I
There's
get
no
what you're
wish,
saying.
there's no wish list. Everything that's there, I need all
Yeah,
that.
other than the 3,000,
Yeah.
there's
If not, I'm gonna get some
$3,000
done.
in supplies, I guess that would be, that would be the only thing, and I think you said that was for, all your increase of 3,000 in expenses is actual office expenses, right?
No, that's the OPEB report.
Oh, I
So
see.
the numbers I just gave you, that's part of the audit.
I see.
So we need the audit report so we can go borrow. So everything has a domino effect. So I need that OPEB report for the audit.
There's nothing in here that's negotiable.
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah, because if you say no to the OPEB report, then it's a problem with the audit. And then they have to have a qualification for the audit. And then Moody sees an issue with that.
Right, right. So, yeah.
Just so you know, just how the cause or the effects.
Yeah.
Right. So in this
So
case,
I'm going to
yeah,
approve
why
this
don't-
one, but we'll take them one at a time.
Yes, why don't we do
Want to do
that?
that? Okay, so I make a motion to approve the town accountant budget as submitted for fiscal year 2021.
Second?
And make that unanimous action? All right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Do
very
you have
much.
any more
Great work.
questions?
Yeah, and great work overall on the budget.
Thank you,
Phenomenal.
appreciate it. All right. Right, yeah.
For various
So I'll send
reasons.
off an email about that.
The overlay?
Yeah, just to see if that's something that would be an option. So, Chief Bradley. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello again.
Hello?
Hello. Police budget, I think, is
73.
page 73.
Ready?
We're ready.
Okay. So I'll go through the overview for expenditures for wages, and then we'll get into some of the line items. So the total requested budget for FY 2021 is $1,852,749. $1,852,749, which is level funded when you compare it to the fiscal 2020 budget of the same amount. So the proposed budget includes the following: a 2% COLA as required by the CBA, the addition of a 14th officer due to anticipated population increase of 10% over the next 2 to 3 years, a change in the command structure to include 3 sergeants for added supervision for less experienced officers. The department will lose an additional 4 veteran officers to retirement in the next 1 to 3 years, and perhaps 2 or 3 more in the following 3 years beyond that. This follows the loss of 4 officers through attrition and retirement in FY19 and 20. I propose the assignment of the senior communications officer as listed in the CBA to our only remaining experienced communications officer. This employee coordinates training for all of our new communications officer and will provide leadership and quality assurance moving forward. The ability to use increased grant funding for wage reimbursement combined with retirements of veteran supervisors will allow the overall budget to be level funded while adding the above proposed personnel initiatives. So that's just kind of a general view on wages. For expenses, the budget includes an increase in expenses and capital outlay of $23,950. This proposed increase is a result of the following. Cruiser line capital outlay is increased by $15,000. Proposing purchasing a 4-wheel drive pickup truck as a cruiser replacement for the fleet, which will allow officers to transport equipment for road closures, special events, search and rescue, and emergency operations. Right now, we find ourselves using personal vehicles quite often to do those things. Computer maintenance has increased $5,000 to cover increased record management software fees and maintenance contracts for our live scan fingerprint machine. Vehicle maintenance has been increased by $1,000 to cover increased costs. Police clothing has been increased by $950 to cover the costs of annual clothing allowance under the CBA for the proposed additional officer. And training fees has been increased by $2,000 to allow for first-line supervisory training.
You see purchase of the pickup truck, you see that as a 1-year bump in that capital request?
Yeah, so, Cruiser was at $40,000 last year. I see that number going up to $45,000 because there is a new model, so all the equipment that we usually swap over does not fit into the new Cruiser. So I see that $15,000 jump. It will go from 55, next year drop back down to 45.
45.
Yeah.
Very good.
So that's Cruiser, that's the state bid price, and includes all the equipment that's added to that Cruiser. The revenue budget, anticipated reimbursable grants have been included in this budget to reduce the overall expense of the operating budget. the FY21 911 Support Incentive Grant, allocating $142,574 to level fund this budget. We also will receive a training grant in approximately $25,000. A couple other revenue items. We have a fee from Hopedale, which is approximately $23,515. Mendon Upton contributes $25,000, and ET $25,000 for the school resource officer program. Those three numbers go into the general fund. So you won't see those three numbers in the budget anywhere. Okay, so
And I know that you had mentioned to us before, but that 911 support and incentive grant, that was up by how many dollars in this particular budget?
So we are up from an amount of 77,000 in previous years up to 195,000. Also, this current year, FY20, we received an additional 165,000 on top of that 195, and that's being used for improvements within the communication center, new radios, radio resources, a dispatch console that needs to be replaced.
Very good.
So I'll get into wages. And you can see the wages are broken down by officer and also by different items, stipends, officer replacement for time off, sick time, education incentive, communications, overtime, part-time wages. You'll see that negative number in there for the 911 support grant. That's the wage reimbursement that's put back into the budget. Last year, there was $62,000 allocated to that. This year, we're allocating $142,000. I anticipate additional dollars. That 142 is a conservative number. Anything that we receive over and above would end up back in free cash at the end of the year, which for FY20, I expect some additional money back into free cash through that program as well.
Okay.
So rather than go through each line item, I'll have you take a look at these. Is there any specific one that you'd like to talk about? We can. You'll see in some situations, depending on the alignment of patrol officer 4 from last year to this year, there may be a decrease because that officer has left the department and replaced by a new officer.
Can you talk a little bit about the computer maintenance?
Sure. So computer maintenance,
That is on page 6, the middle of the page.
That
Or
was
76, sorry, the
76.
middle of the page. Under police building maintenance, it was 0 last year and 18.5 in this budget.
so what we've done in this budget, we've collapsed some of the expense line items. So that computer maintenance line item, if you look on page 77, the bottom of the page under expenses for dispatcher, you'll see a 13.5 number for last year and a 0 number for this year.
Yeah, perfect.
That is that computer maintenance line item.
Yeah.
And I've added the 5,000, as I talked about in the overview, to cover increased vendor fees and preventive maintenance for our live scan printer.
So Chief, if I could, I apologize, because I probably should have started tonight's conversation with letting the board know that as we went through all the department's budgets, you know, we noticed that there's a lot of account numbers that are out there that are really for no purpose. So what we try to do is try to align operations with operations and collapse them all under specific account numbers. So one, it makes tracking our budget a lot easier, but as important, it allows the department head to be able to move within that account, you know, in case they have an overage in one area, they can use those dollars to backfill that area. So this is just the first example that you noticed that the computer maintenance account is no longer, that number has been moved on the general maintenance. I believe it's general maintenance, right, Chief?
Right, that's certainly best practice, and it gives you the flexibility to more effectively manage your budget, so that's
To give
great.
you an example, I had 3 different account numbers. I had police clothing allowance, full-time dispatch clothing allowance, part-time clothing dispatch allowance. We've condensed all those to just clothing allowance.
Right.
To one account. So we can, we have the ability to use that one account for all those expenses.
And it's just easier on every front to manage, so.
So what we'll have to do a better job explaining at town meeting, they may see that account specifically go up by, say, 20%, say, oh, why did it go up 20%?
Right, but it went down.
It's still a net zero, it's because we have a 0% in the old account that will no longer be used.
Yep, good.
So from page 75, is there any questions before I move on to line items? And I can tell you where some of those accounts have been collapsed.
I guess the only question I had was police department coordinator to police department specialist, that title change there?
Yeah, so that title change was as a result of looking at the job description and changing that from one, it goes from one grade to the next grade. So looking at that person's responsibilities and duties, an overview of that or a relook at that, jump them up to a different category. So from a grade 4 to a 5? 4 to a 5. From a grade 4 to a 5. So that's the title change. Same person in that position, title change at a different grade in looking at the new step in classification that the town has rolled out. This is where that person would fall. Okay, I'll move on to page 76. Police utilities, level funded. You'll see a radio maintenance line item. That has gone from 2,200 down to 0. That item is now included under police expense. Same dollar amount, 2,200, but it has been collapsed into police expense. Police building maintenance, that's where the computer maintenance line item that we just discussed has been put into. It was previously under dispatch. The rest of those items have been level funded except for computer maintenance, which is the 5,000 increase we discussed. Police training. Proposing increasing that by $2,000 for additional courses for first-line supervisors. Police expense, we discussed the $2,200 in radio maintenance. That is the difference from last year to this year is moving that account or that line item to this account. Cruiser gas, level funded. Cruiser maintenance, an increase of $1,000 for additional costs. The clothing allowance, which I just described, that's taking those other line items, collapsing them into one account, plus an additional $950 for the additional officer under the CBA. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see these are the separate dispatch line items that have been collapsed into the police budget.
Never really noticed that. Police clothing allowance is a fairly sizable number.
Yeah, it's $1,250 per officer under the CBA, which a pair of uniform pants costs $110 for one pair, so you can imagine it adds up quickly.
That doesn't include the body armor or anything like that, that's just the soft clothing.
Clothing, leather gear, miscellaneous items is included in that.
Yeah.
So the best thing about this budget is that, there's, as you heard from the chief, a number of items had gone up, but at the end, when you look at the grand total, it's the same budget as last year. So increasing services at the same cost, I think, is something we all strive to do.
It's remarkable to have a budget presentation with level funded.
Yeah. For all the
Great
down
work. It doesn't happen often. So.
I can't guarantee that every year.
No, but we'll take it when we can get it. Taxpayers will take it when they can get it, believe me.
Right. I was going to say, for all the downturn and all the discussion about officers retiring, we know it's going to cost us in the Worcester County retirement system, but this is the offset, which is you're hiring in new staff at a much lower rate.
Right.
So it's unusual that we would probably ever see it level funded again.
Yep. The next 2 or 3 years are going to be difficult staffing-wise. We'll have a lot of people coming and going, but I think this budget prepares us for that and gives us a head start.
Very good planning.
Great.
Very good.
Okay.
I don't
Thank
have
you.
any other questions.
Great
Any
job,
questions?
Chief.
Just do one with this one.
Do you think?
Do you want to approve this as it is?
Budget as it is? Okay.
Make a motion that we approve the budget for 2020 as submitted.
Second?
Make that unanimous action? Good
Thank you for
evening,
your time.
Chief. Thank you.
Yeah, great work.
Okay. All right, so we got town accountant and police done. Fire chief, Chief DeFranzo. Good evening.
Good evening. I don't know how the heck I follow that. Kind of gonna be the gloomy dust is gonna bring you back to reality with this trying to make my department work.
We saved our complaints for you.
go first. Yeah, I know.
He has his privileges.
Yeah, I know.
Page 64 in the budget.
Yes. All right, so, the total recommended for fiscal year 2021 for our fire, EMS, and emergency management is $1,285,707. This is roughly an increase of $67,136, or a 5.51% increase. Now, these figures represent a combined budget of the fire, EMS, and emergency management, which is what you all wanted when I got hired here, to bring all those agencies into one umbrella, so that's what we've tried to do here. Some of the highlights that you'll see as we go through it, the wage increase was about $40,756, or about a 4.4 increase. That comes from a 2% COLA per collective bargaining agreement that we've been working on aggressively, along with some other movements within their agreement that we're still working on. I have one employee within that collective bargaining agreement that's moving up a step, and then we're asking for additional dollars to pay for one paramedic stipend. So out of one of the open positions that I have, we can turn it into a paramedic position just by paying a stipend, that's it. On some of the expenditures, the increase overall for the expenses was $21,455, or 6.73% increase. Some of that is I'm still recovering from the utilities, which has been underfunded for the last couple of years. So I took a really hard look and tried to make sure we could kind of come in pretty close to what we're spending on utilities versus me asking for budget transfers to make up the difference. So I think we're going to be pretty accurate this year, and maybe a few dollars off, but we're a lot closer this year than you have been the last couple of years. I did ask for an increase in building maintenance of $3,000 to continue to maintain operational systems that are over 15 years old. I know a lot of people in town still call it the new fire station, but it's 15, 20 years old now, believe it or not. And as you heard, you're finally paying it off on the debt exclusion, so that tells you how long the building really has been in town and been in use. So some of the systems are starting to show their age and starting to fail, and because the systems are so old, trying to get parts for them is somewhat expensive. So it's been a difficult and frustrating time to keep the systems, operating. We've had some expense line items consolidated into different accounts, much like the police department budget, so we'll go through some of those. An increase in overall expenses of $1,150 and repairs to vehicles of $2,230. The ambulances are increasing in age, they're starting to cost me a little money to keep them up and running as we keep going forward with those. An increase in clothing allowance of $750 to cover contractual agreements. EMS supplies of $1,700 to cover rising pharmacy and supply costs. I'm sure you see on the news all the time, like I do, pharmacy costs are they are what they are, and the federal government's doing what they can to curb those costs, but until they can put some, meat to some of these legislative agendas that they want to try to push forward, we got to pay what we got to pay. Continue initiative of replacing and meeting
the NFPA standard of 10-year replacement of turnout gear, so you're gonna see an additional set of turnout gear in the budget. So last year, we did 4 sets in the budget, 4 sets was an article. This year, you're seeing 5 sets in the budget with 3 sets as an article. So every year, we take 1 set out of the article and bring it into the budget to have a final number of 8 sets within the budget that gets a cycle of us turning over turnout gear within the department, so that we're meeting that national standard of 10 sets. A new set every 10 years as we move forward. Some revenues, go ahead.
Talk about that for just a second.
Sure.
Dave. How many sets total of turnout gear?
We have about 40 sets.
About 40 sets, okay.
Yep, so as you turn them over, the goal is to hopefully turn the set over every 5 years. That set then becomes the person's backup set. And then after 10 years, it's removed from service. And the reason we want everybody to have 2 sets of gear is if they go out on a call and it's raining, their gear gets soaking wet, obviously that's not something I want them to be putting back on if they have to go to a building fire, because now we can end up with steam burns and other type of issues if they have to enter a burning structure. That's not something that is something I don't think we want to do as far as keeping our people safe. So that's the goal. Again, it's something that we can do over time. It's not a big chunk. And then once we get used to that cycle, it'll just be an every year line item budget for 8 sets of gear. So, but we needed to start somewhere, so last year was kind of the stepping off point, which I thought was a great way to start moving forward and getting things in a better progression and seeing, some level things move out in the budget.
Okay.
Revenues, the ambulance, we do roughly about the same amount of calls every year. It's within about 730 calls, give or take 10 or 15 every year. And that's over the last 10 or 15 years from what I can see. So it's amazing we don't do many more or any less, where we seem to be around 700 and some odd. So I can't project any more than 265,000 in ambulance billing receipts. We are starting to look at potentially doing what we call in the business a bundled service approach. Right now, you do an itemized bill when you do your ambulance billing, and that's been in effect for the last number of years. We can do what we call a bundled approach. We can also raise the limits to the maximum, but once you do that, then you have no other room to raise it or make adjustments in the ambulance billing. So that's something we're still looking at, and we'll probably put together a proposal for you to look at, understand, and then make decisions on if that's something that you want to do going forward. But for now, this is what you have in place, and I feel confident that we'll be in about 265. That seems to be the average.
This says 260. Is it 265 or 260?
Might be 260.
Okay.
Let me see. Maybe I have a typo on my page.
Okay.
So it might be 260. So I apologize for the error.
Has that been relatively flat for the last few years?
It has,
I know you
yeah.
said the runs are about the
Because
same.
the runs are about the same, we have the same demographics, we have the same payer mix, so a lot of those percentages really are not going to change. The only way they're going to aggressively change is if we put everything under one umbrella bundle type approach, and then you do typically 200 or 200 plus percentage over Medicare and Medicaid rates, which is what the federal government and the state allow you to bill those patients that have that type of health insurance. So we pretty much push everything to those that have traditional insurances. They're the ones that pay the big amount of money. So grants, as you know, last year we brought in over $90,000 in AFG funding. AFG opened up yesterday or today. So we will be applying again this year for some projects. I'm not sure what the final numbers will be, but we'll try to do our best to bring in more federal dollars through this program if we're successful. So, but by doing this, it saved obviously the town a lot of money by us getting federal dollars to replace the cardiac monitors on the ambulances. It also paid for a training program, which we'll be doing in the spring to better educate the staff on pump operations and safely driving emergency apparatus. So those two things will be coming along in the spring. Again, like I said, we'll continue to pursue other grant opportunities wherever and whenever we can. So we'll continue to keep going for that. So with that, I'm seeking two capital requests, I'm sorry. One for $159,000, which is for the purchase of portable radio equipment, and the other one's the $14,000 for the purchase of 3 sets of personal protective firefighting gear. So the $159,000 article is for the portable radio equipment and I know we talked about this before, we did a regional grant opportunity with Mendon last year for radio equipment, both for them and for us. And that was to replace all of our radio equipment, which is antiquated, out of date, no longer made or serviced, or I can't even get parts. And that was both for mobile and handheld type equipment. So I could try again for an AFG, but as I just told you, they opened up yesterday. It's gonna run for 30 days, and then it sits until they go the review process, everything else, and then it's a crapshoot. There's no guarantee that I get those dollars from the federal government. So I don't want to push and wait another year on portable radio equipment, which outlines in my wording is that, you know, that's a key piece of equipment for every public safety official that's out in the field. That's their main line of communication back to dispatch to get them help, or to their fellow, you know, public safety official. It's a key piece of equipment, and I really hate to, you know, push that off another year. So it's kind of an important piece of equipment that I'd like to see us try and get accomplished this year through the article. The other piece that you'll see in the budget is I've allocated $5,000 within the budget to start replacing mobile equipment. The mobile equipment we have, while it's old, I can still use it, it's still serviceable. It's the fire truck, so it's not like, you know, if that fails, we have the portable radios if we're successful in getting those. So I felt that that was kind of, again, like the turnout gear approach. What can we do collectively, not in one big chunk, but how can we take some of the problem away now and then finish up the problem some other fashion? So this was something that I worked with the town manager on a compromise on how we could get the goal of replacing all of the radio equipment done within the department, and this was what we felt would be the best. So that's why you'll see the $5,000 in the budget, and then the $159,000 article request.
The 159K, that's portable radio equipment, be all the full-time and call staff?
Yeah, so what I did was I based it exactly off of what I applied for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant. So what they like to see you have is one radio per seated position in your apparatus. So that's how I came up with the number.
So how many pieces of equipment is that?
That's at the end. Is it in this one? No. It's in this stack.
I guess my only thought is moving forward, kind of like we used to have radios in our tow trucks, and then cell phones come out, and you move to the cell phone, and you never use the radio anymore. So I'm just kind of thinking if we budget $5,000 for mobile devices that are bolted into the trucks.
Yep.
To run, you know, radio communication, but everybody essentially has, I'm going to call them walkie-talkies, but they're portable radios.
Correct.
Where we can talk to one another via that. I understand what you're trying to do, but I just wonder if that $5,000 should be in the budget as a year-to-year operating expense. If those, you know, if that equipment eventually will time out.
Which, the portable radio, what are we talking?
The mobile equipment.
The mobile radio equipment, so sure.
It sounds to me like the portable equipment is going to supersede the mobile equipment.
Well, no, they're both in conjunction with one another. So you typically don't want to use a portable piece of equipment when you're riding in an apparatus. You want to use a radio that gives you a lot more wattage when you're making the transmission, so that you can reach further distances. A portable radio can only get you a couple of miles. Okay, we're lucky with the infrastructure that we have here in town. We have a repeater type system that we can communicate pretty much across the town, but if that repeater system were to fail, or if there was an issue, well, then now the portable radio won't make it back to dispatch. It won't make it back to the operations center. So by having a mobile radio in the truck that can push out 50, 60 watts, you should be able to get back to the dispatch center. So, and you're right, over time, technology is going to drive communications in general, but I don't see two-way radio communications coming under that communications change for at least quite a few more years. There's still a lot to do for the infrastructure to make it work. While they're aggressively pursuing all of that, it's still not the best way to go. Plus, we don't own that network. We own our radio channel. We own the towers. We own the base radios. We own everything. So we're not relying on anybody else to communicate over our frequency. We can do anything we want with it. Once you go with a private system, you don't own that anymore. So if the cell tower fails or that infrastructure fails, you're kind of at their whim, kind of like the internet. We're all at Spectrum's whim. If it's not working, well, I don't have internet, and I can't make emails. I can't do a lot of things without the internet. But we don't own it. We can't do anything about it. So two-way radio communications, I don't think are going to change for quite the foreseeable future. So to invest in radio equipment today, I feel confident that you're going to have this equipment for at least another 10 or 15 years. And then maybe the next person who's sitting in this seat can figure out what the next step is gonna be. And by having some things in the budget, you can start to plan and move forward with funding that's already in the budget, start to make that changeover versus asking for a huge lump sum of money to make that adjustment.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, the only caveat I guess I would say is, I personally like to see warrant articles. I know that you feel like it's more of a planning process when it's built right into the budget, but I always feel like, again, if we have to find money in the budget, we have an opportunity here to move 2 of those articles over to warrant articles, take them out of the operational side of the budget, and that would free up roughly $10,000. So I just think that's something that we need to be aware of, again, assuming we're gonna have some sort of a shortfall. And again, that may not be true, but if we have a shortfall, with the school budget, there may be something that we could do. Not asking them to delete that equipment, just asking them to move it over to a warrant article. Be paid out of free cash instead of operations. But just something to think about.
Sure. But again, then I'd be relying on free cash every year to come up with 10 grand or 5 grand or whatever the number is to continually replace mobile equipment. Whereas if we put it in the operating budget, it's there, should a failure occur, I have monies within the budget to fix the problem immediately versus going without until we have another special town meeting or an annual town meeting, so. But you guys certainly make the final call at the end of the day, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with including that as part of an operating budget. It's equipment that you're constantly having to replace and upgrade and change over every year. It's not going to go away. You're not going to suddenly be spending less on that kind of equipment. So.
No, and I certainly could spend more. The portable radio equipment, we're going to invest in that very heavily because that's a key piece of equipment, the mobile radio equipment. I can go something a little less than, the A standard. I can go with a A- or a B+ standard, and that'll be more than comfortable for us to run and operate, so.
I did have one other question, going back to the wages, where it's the 4.40% increase.
Yep.
You have the 2% COLA, 1 employee moving up on the CBA scale, and the additional 1 paramedic stipend.
Yes.
What does that breakdown look like of those 3? I can see that it adds up to the 40,756. What would that breakdown be?
Well, some of that, we're still in negotiations with the union, so I can't get too specific on some of that.
Okay.
But I can tell you, a step increase, if all goes through, he moves from roughly 63,400 to 64,700.
64,700, you said?
Yeah,
Okay.
and those are rough numbers.
Okay. And a paramedic stipend now is 3,000?
Those are some of the adjustments that we're making, and again, the contract's not final, but as we go through the budget, you'll see some items and line items that have made some adjustments in the funding source for that. So until everything's final, I don't want to put anything out in the public view until we get everything finalized and signed, unless the town manager wants to make it public as to what we're doing, so.
Yeah, I think we should hold off on now until they sign the contract. The chief is anticipating an execution of the MOA in this budget. That's why it's represented the way it is. But they haven't signed the MOA. We're still working on some details on the MOA. Once the MOA is signed, then we could talk more freely about some of the details.
But I can tell you, it's been a very good discussion. I think we've done a lot to improve what people see and what we're going to do going forward, so.
Okay.
So as we go through the budget, the career paramedic stipend, you'll see a huge difference from what was budgeted last year to what was requested this year. The difference is about $33,000. But let's go through the rest of the line items so you can see where most of that is coming from. The safe coordinator stayed flat, longevity stayed flat. The hourly compensation to the call department, based on the new firefighters we put on last year, they're gonna move up a step. And then just some other wage issues that we have, that rose by 4.19%. The holiday account, that dropped almost $22,000. Okay? The firefighter, paramedic career positions, that went up by 29.29%. The firefighter EMT career position, that dropped $55,245. The other big item that was an adjustment was the career EMT stipends, that went up $1,650. So if you take all of the differences, so the drops, that totaled over $77,000 in changes. We added $107,446 to move some things around. That came up for the difference of $30,234. So out of those line items that you see big numbers change and move, the difference after everything shakes out and the collective bargaining agreement is over is $30,234.
So just to try to have you digest this a little bit.
Yeah.
What we recognize in the collective bargaining agreement is that we had a holiday budget. So you see this line of holidays times 11, that was, we were losing control of, and it was from prior CBAs. And so we were able to basically, without getting into too much detail, move that number downward and then take the difference and then put that in the paramedic stipend. So you'll hear me talk a lot about recruitment and retention. So the paramedic overall is going to make similar wages. It's just that they're not going to see it in their holiday pay, rather they're going to see it in their stipend, if that makes sense. And so when we're recruiting firefighter paramedics, and the first thing they look at is, well, how much am I going to, what's my salary, right? So what's my base salary and what's my stipend? Hopkinton's stipend is around $7,500. So they say, do I want to go to Hopkinton and make $7,500, or I want to go to Upton and make $3,000 in the stipend? So basically, we took the holiday pay they were making, which you wouldn't see in an advertisement for a job description. You wouldn't see that you're going to get paid 11 holidays, right? But you would see in the advertisement the stipend. So what we're trying to do is take the money that we're paying in holidays, move that over to stipend, so now when we advertise, we're now competitive, at least on paper, to a lot of our neighbors. And so that's why you'll see the major increase on the stipends and then the major decrease on the holiday pay.
So we did just kind of a shell game with the dollars moving from different accounts.
Right. And that, talking about that stipend for just a minute now, that's a stipend that's in an increase from being an EMT, basically, right? That's from an EMT to a paramedic stipend.
Correct.
Is what that difference is from. Okay. And basically, we want to make sure that that is appropriate with the additional training that, and expertise someone brings to the department.
Correct. So at the end, when you boil it all down, it's a 4.4% increase in the wages from last year.
Right. Which is $40,000, a little over $40,000.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions on wages? Everybody's okay?
Right, you good?
No, I'm good, thank
Okay.
you.
Maureen?
I'm all set.
Utilities, like I outlined in my statement, I've done my best to reflect exactly as close as I can to what we think we're actually going to do for utilities this year. So hopefully we're pretty close with the 47.5, so that's a 5.56% increase. I looked at my water account, and I think moving that down $700, I still feel comfortable. We haven't ever really hit the $1,000 mark over the last couple of years, so me moving it down to 1,000 should be fine, along with some adjustments in the other accounts to make it more, equitable of what we actually do.
Okay.
The building maintenance account, you'll see some adjustments from different line items from last year, like was previously described. So you see janitorial supplies, that came out of expenses and was moved into building maintenance. The fire extinguisher account came out of expenses and was moved into building maintenance. So some of those drivers, make it look like it's a huge uptick from last year of 26%, but that's not really accurate. It really is only an additional $3,000 overall in the building maintenance account, because all those other accounts were level funded. So the fire extinguishers was the same as last year, the janitorial supplies was the same as last year. So that's all we're asking for, is an extra $3,000.
Okay.
The training account, we have some minimal increases in that. We went from 13 to 14,000 in EMS training. Fire training went from 6,500 to 7,000. We want to try to bring in some additional levels of expertise to, have some outside people come in and educate some of our staff on some of the better ways to do some of their job functions that they're doing today. Fire EMS expenses, you'll see vehicle cleaning supplies, that got moved to vehicle maintenance. The mobile radio request is in here under radio repair replace, that's 5,000, so that's something new. Janitorial got moved to building maintenance. You'll see forest fire expense of 4,000. That was moved from the DPW budget account. For some reason, and it took me a little bit to figure it out when I first got here, I don't understand how it ever got there, but if you looked under the DPW expense, and I put the account number in on my page, but I can certainly give it to you, under 0100-249-5400, that was the account for forest fire expense. So it didn't make sense for it to sit under the DPW account, under their line items for forestry and forestry management and all those things. So we moved it out of that and put it under the expense account. So it's still level funded at 4,000. There was no increase in that. It was just moved from one area of the budget to mine. So overall, the total increase is 38,150. Moving all of those things around, but pretty much everything was level funded. The only thing we asked for was an extra $500 in miscellaneous expenses. The copier lease, now that we have a contract, I was able to actually, put a number to it. Last year we had 1,700. This year after we get the bills and look at them, it's 2,050. So those are really the only big adjustments in that account from last year. Fuel stayed the same. Vehicle maintenance, we moving some vehicle cleaning supplies from expenses, we moved it to vehicle maintenance. I've asked for, again, some increases for the EMS repairs and fire vehicle repairs. We do have somewhat of an older fleet on some of these things, so labor rates aren't exactly cheap, so it costs us some money, and again, parts for some of these things is a little more expensive, so those are the reasons for those increases. Clothing, $750 difference from last year. The fire EMS new equipment, everything stayed the same except for the PPE fire gear. This year it's 5 sets instead of the 4. So that's the only change to that. So that's pretty much it for the fire part of the budget. Any questions on that piece? The ambulance part of the budget, again, the increase to medications and medical supplies, that went up a few $100 from $36,300 to $38,000. Everything else pretty much stayed flat. We did increase ambulance service licensing and EMT recertifications for an extra $100. We have been putting on some more EMTs, so that's where those reimbursement dollars come from. But other than that, everything else is zero. No change from last year. In the emergency management side of the operations, no increases in that section of the budget at all. So the emergency management would be page 71.
I thought we had taken that out of the budget, emergency management. That was an emergency management stipend, was it?
No wages, there's everything zero in wages. However, you still have expenses in there. So there's miscellaneous expense for the regional emergency planning committee that we belong to. So the dues for that is $500. And then miscellaneous expenses just to maintain the emergency operations center that we have, like office stuff, those types of things. And then the last piece is the emergency notification system, the reverse 911. That's $6,500. So there's no change in any of those expenses at all.
When he came aboard. That's salary to the previous emergency management salary.
I know, that's why I brought it up, yeah.
What?
We had a separate stipend in the budget for emergency management. It was really an emergency management director stipend. And when we hired Chief DeFranzo, that went away. It's included in his salary.
Yeah.
We eliminated that expense out of the budget.
I recall.
So that's, in a nutshell, the budget for fire, EMS, and emergency management.
Do you have any questions, Mark?
All set.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's see. I think that's the only thing that I think that's the only thing that we just have to be aware of is if we did have to make any adjustments, would we bother making an adjustment at that figure?
The 10,000.
We'll worry about it after, I suppose. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the scheme of things, that's probably not going to be where we have to fight the fight. It's going to be here. It's going to
Next on the budget review process
Do
is
we want
the
to
town.
make a motion to approve this as it is, or?
I would. Yeah, we should, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Make a motion that we approve the fire and EMS budget for fiscal year 2021 as submitted.
Second?
Make that unanimous action. Town manager's budget. Derek, what do you have for us?
So, I know that Steve Rackerton here and Gary Bowen are both here to hear a little bit about the part-time town planner position that's presented in this evening's budget. So when I get to that portion, if you want to stop to allow them both to speak, that's entirely up to you. Those are just some of the paperwork regarding the position. So regarding the budget itself, this is the Board of Selectmen Town Manager budget at a total request of $2,450,958. That is an increase of $245,765,000 for approximately 11.1% increase. As you will learn, a lot of what's in this budget are fixed costs like pension and insurance, which are really beyond our control at this point. But relative to wages, this is an increase of $59,000 approximately. And the major driver behind that is the $40,000 request to implement a part-time economic development coordinator / town planner. And so that is what is before you today. I had sent a draft job description to the planning board and the economic development committee, I think back in December, and asked both boards to weigh in on this, given the fact that this position is going to be working with the economic development committee, is going to be working with the planning board, is going to be working with the ZBA, and quite frankly, if time allows, would be working with our housing trust, so our affordable housing plan. This position, after doing a review throughout the region on like-sized communities, is slated at $40,000 because when we looked at full-time positions, they were anywhere in the range of $60,000 upwards to $78,000 for a full-time position. So again, trying to ballpark what we think it would cost us to bring in a part-time position at 19 and a half hours, could be anywhere from, I would say, $35,000 to $40,000, depending on the person's credentials and their level of experience. Again, and I think it's important to note that, as we all know, we have a lot of developments going on in town. We have the Pulte project, the RFP committee, as you heard, and the Economic Development Committee have been working on the town center revitalization, and that's going to take a lot when we think about involving MassDOT and a MassWorks grant. We had a great presentation this morning from the state who came in to talk about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, and they used Millbury, one of our neighbors, as a great example of what the planning department did in bringing in over $800,000 for their town center infrastructure project, to think about like greenscape and using porous pavement in their town center. So again, this position provides a lot of opportunities, I think, that we're missing by not having someone in place for this. I certainly think that, and I don't want to speak for the boards and committees, but I think having a professional to assist them, to provide technical advice, to do research on their behalf, like maybe making zoning changes, doing the research to bring before them for consideration, to hold public hearings, I think would go a long way. As a side note, I had never had a chance to talk to the previous town manager during my interview process, and after I had started, I had taken a couple months and tried to learn the town, and ultimately we had coffee, and we talked about a lot of things, but one thing that always stuck with me, the previous town manager had said that this town, she believes, would have been better served if they had hired a town planner first before a town manager, giving the upward growth in this community. And so we're beyond that. That water's under the bridge. But I think this now is the time that we really strongly consider implementing such a position. I do believe that if we were successful, that this position could realistically turn to a full-time position within 24 months. So I'll stop there regarding this position. I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions, but again, I know that there were others in the audience that specifically came here to talk about the town planner position.
Yeah, I think while we're on that topic, it'd be a good time, Gary Bohan, I think you're the planning board chair, correct? And Steve Raggadin, if you'd like to both come up. I guess I'd kind of be curious as to how you see, I guess we'll start with the planning board side. I know that, in my opinion, you do a lot of the work now that we would be asking a planner to do. So I guess if you'd maybe talk a little bit, I guess historically, maybe what your board has had to deal with, problems, things you've negotiated, things along that nature, and then what do you think that how do you see a town planner helping you?
Well, in the past, we have relied on Central Mass as an adjunct to the planning board for town planning services, and that's typically comes at about 24 hours a year, 24 hours per year worth of services, which obviously isn't that much. A while back, there was a warrant article that passed that got us a town planner, I think for a 6-month period for 15 or 20 hours a week. So that was more substantial. That was also with Central Mass. And quite honestly, that didn't really pan out as good as we had hoped. I think largely because through no fault of Central Mass, it was an outsider that was coming to our meetings once or twice a month, and really just kind of clogging up our agenda with items we didn't really make that much headway with, quite honestly. And the board has not discussed this proposal yet as a board, so you're just hearing one person's opinion. But what struck me when I read this proposal is it would be someone that would be more in the town versus an outsider, and I think that's an important distinction. How it might help us, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many hours, if you will, we would need per week. But in my first read, it looked like this person would not only be helping the planning board, but I think it was the Concom and the ZBA. In general, we've been pretty self-sufficient, like I said, with the exception of relying on Central Mass. So, quite honestly, I'm here more tonight to listen than to offer my opinion. And I think it would be a good idea. This has already been helpful, just your 5-minute presentation. So I'm thinking in the in the near future, perhaps we have the town manager appear before the full board, and in the meantime, I'll throw it on the agenda for next Tuesday, we can start the discussion going. But, you know, grant writing is always something that gets brought up as a way to, you know, to help defray the salary. And the Upton Center, you know, we're in what looks to be an uptick there, hopefully. And I think having a town planner could certainly help there. And, you know, I think the benefit, you know, just generally speaking, is you get an expertise that that no one on the planning board necessarily has. You know, as you know, we're just none of us are planners per se. So you get that to me is the attraction. You get an individual that is schooled and well versed in these matters. So I can't really point to anything specific in how we might use a town planner, but certainly the board is you know, is open to listening and hearing more.
If I can hold you for just a minute, Steve, before you talk about it, I just wanted to get back to what you mentioned about the Central Mass Regional Planner who worked with your board. Did you see any benefit to that help?
It was.
If you have any questions for Gary.
Yeah, it's probably going back about 10 years. It didn't really, quite honestly, it just didn't really pan out as well as we hoped. I mean, to get more into it, it was, you know, younger person. I'm not sure how much experience they actually had, and it seemed to be, you know, to me the attraction is to have someone that's the eyes and ears for the planning board, and can vet out, bring to our attention, you know, much like the town manager, if you will, can provide some of that functionality for the select board. Perhaps the town planner could provide that for the planning board. Someone that knows the developers, that knows the town, and knows some of the politics and so on and so forth. And you're not going to get that with someone that shows up from Central Mass twice a month to tell you the latest and greatest in zoning.
Did anybody have any questions for Mr. Bohan on the planning board side? Did you have any questions?
No.
I fully support a town planner. I mean, I worked with one, and she was awesome. She did a lot of the work, a lot of the footwork, a lot of the field work, a lot of the research. She also did the economic development. She was part of the ZAC committee, which was the zoning advisory committee. She put a lot of time in. She was very good at what she did.
So we're talking about two different people, right?
Yeah, just the planner. And, well, she also did the economic development, too.
And who are we referring to?
The town planner in Hopkinton.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm skeptical in the sense that I feel in Upton, you know, projects get brought to us. This is really the first time that our community has really looked outside and tried to promote a project, really across the street. Downtown revitalization is our, you know, I would say, as far as what I can really remember, our first attempt at really trying to promote a project. And I just am worried that the cost, this labor cost that's associated with the position, I'm just kind of skeptical that it's going to go up in smoke, because we're not really going to see a benefit, is my only concern. You know, I'm feeling that your board has done, you know, a great job in the past as far as negotiating different things, negotiating maybe it's a council of aging ban or dollars for RecCom or different things that you've been able to, that I'm aware of anyways. I'm sure there's more open space, walking trails, things like that. You negotiate when projects come before your board. So I feel like a lot of that's already done. So do you need another negotiating tool? Do you know, again, I hate to be skeptical, but is this another hurdle, another person to get past? If there is an idea that somebody wants to come to town, you know, is this just another hurdle? Is this another, you know, ZBA, EDC, planning board, and a town planner? You know, does that put up an additional roadblock is just something I'm thinking, again, just thinking out loud.
So if I may, I have a little bit of experience in this space. I was the chairman of the planning board in Northbridge, was on the zoning board for 7 years, and we had a town planner in Northbridge. And the value he added to everything that the planning board, the zoning board, and the town manager did was exemplary. I mean, we were a planning board of volunteers, not unlike the planning board here in Upton. Nobody has any professional, municipal, local government, zoning, bylaw experience required. It's not a requirement to be on the planning board, and often there's an expertise there that doesn't exist on the planning board, and that was mentioned by the chair in front of us. And I also think oftentimes we don't know what we don't know, right? So people that haven't worked with a town planner don't necessarily appreciate all of the value that they can bring to a community. Just in grant writing, I know the town planner in Northbridge brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years that really made a difference in terms of the development of the town, and there's no way that would have been done if we didn't have a town planner. In terms of negotiating with and managing people that are doing subdivisions and contractors and developers, you know, like we've got up here off of Governor's Landing with Pulte, you know, with the 8 Grove Street, with the work across the street that we're looking at doing, even in regards to the community center, right? Like, those are all places where having a professionalized town planner just makes a huge difference. And we're increasing our housing inventory by 400 plus units over the next few years between the 3 developments that are going in. That's a lot of development. There's a lot of planning implications. We're doing this downtown project. We want to spend $8 or $9 million on a community center. I mean, there's a heck of a lot going on in this town over the next several years that, to me, even highlight the need now more so than ever for a town planner. So that's my
I don't think it's 400 units of new building. Don't we have 160 odd units up at Upton Ridge, I think it is?
Yeah, thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah.
And then how many are up at Governor's Landing?
Oh, geez, at last count, I think we're, the number's like 60, I think.
Oh, 60, okay.
Yeah, don't quote me on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's varied greatly. It's come down quite a bit.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And then the 44 that Loberser's doing right across from the senior center there. So regardless, there's a lot of development going on in town, right? There's a lot of growth happening. It's what Chief Bradley talked about, 10% population growth. That's partly tied to the housing growth. So, there's a lot going on. We've got the TIP project that's going to be happening. So I think that the timing is right.
We've always managed these in the past. We've had these types of upticks. Certainly if you think of Howard Farm, that was a big project that took place not too many years ago. We've had upticks like this before. This isn't totally unprecedented. The projects that are on the in queue right now, I mean, we've seen it in the past, but of course we're right in the middle of it right now. The only thing I would say about the grant writing, I'm sure there's opportunities there for grant writing, but I think our staff is doing a good job as far as our department heads. Derek has written a couple of grants. Chief Bradley, Chief DeFranzo, I think our RecCom director wrote a grant for the walk. So I think we've really picked up the pace with grant writing. Maybe there's more opportunities with the town planner?
Yeah, there are significantly more opportunities, and none of those grants relate in any way to town planning. Right, you guys don't apply for grants as a normal course.
As a general rule, we do not.
Right, so there are a lot of grants available for the types of work that a planning board does.
From an Economic Development Committee perspective, I can tell you that none of us on the committee are experts in economic development. Okay? We're all volunteers. And for as long as I've lived in town, 40 years, we've always gotten by, Upton has, with volunteers. I think we're at a tipping point in the town where we can if we go in one direction, we can make some pretty impressive progress. If we go in a different direction, we can basically stay where we are. And to your point about the town planner, I don't see a town planner as an obstacle at all. In fact, I see a town planner as the opposite. A town planner can act as a magnet to attract new businesses to a town, to attract new housing projects to a town, to help build our base so that we're not, 95% reliant on property tax anymore. One of the things that the Economic Development Committee is thinking about doing this year is trying to look at the zoning in West Upton Center. There's a possibility of a significant development there where the gas station is. Derek has mentioned a couple of times that it would be great if we could use CPC funds to buy the other gas station and turn it into a park. There are no design standards in place for West Upton Center. So I see this as an opportunity where a planner, professional town planner could provide some significant benefit to us in helping us figure out what can we do to improve the economic activity in West Upton Center. We've also have been interested in some sidewalk projects. Well, there hasn't been any thinking or planning about sidewalks, and we know we have a need, but without a planner to help us, we just come up with, well, maybe we should do this sidewalk, we need a planner to help say, well, let's put together a 5-year plan for sidewalks, and let's see how much money we can leverage from the Complete Streets program and other programs that might be available to help us, because we can't do it on our own. I just learned how expensive sidewalks are. You wouldn't think a sidewalk would be an expensive thing to do, but DPW got a quote for a sidewalk on Maple Avenue, and when I heard how much it would cost, it just kind of boggled my mind. How is it possible a sidewalk could cost that much money? But with all the permits and all the things that have to be addressed, it has to be ADA compliant. You have to make sure that the other sidewalk on the other side of the railroad tracks is ADA compliant. It's a huge amount of money for sidewalks. Well, we're not the experts in doing sidewalks, and we can't plan, for what sidewalks should come at what time, because we just don't have that piece. So having a planner to help us with things like sidewalks is a silly thing, but it's an expensive thing for a town to do. I see a huge amount of benefit there. So just those two things alone, I think we could get a tremendous amount of help from a professional planner. And we have also used CMRPC for some things. They've been working with us on writing the economic development plan for the town. And the only benefit that we got from them in doing it is they have access to all the GIS maps. We don't have that. They have access to all kinds of statistical data on growth and all this other stuff that we don't have. But the bottom line is, for that plan to be useful for us, we have to come up with goals. They have no clue on what the goals should be because they're not part of our town. So our committee has to come up with the goals. And again, we're not professional planners. We know what things we'd like to see, but who knows if those are the right things for the direction we want to go in. So from that perspective, I see a huge benefit. The last thing is, when we worked on the zoning change for across the street, Gary and I spent, I can't tell you how many hours working through the weeds of the zoning bylaw. Now, I've never done that ever. Gary's got more experience in it but this is not a strength that we bring to that. Whereas a planner, would be expected to know all the ins and outs of zoning and how to write a zoning bylaw that would address the things that need to be addressed. So, did we get it right? I don't really know. We're not experts, but I don't want to have to go through that again if we try to make some zoning changes for West Upton Center, because we're not the right people to be doing this. We need a professional person to help us. And that's where I see a planner providing a tremendous amount of value for the town. $40,000 for a salary for a part-time planner, the benefit that the town could get, in my opinion, could easily be 3 or 4 times that amount, in terms of businesses that could come in and other things that they could help us with. So I see this not as a cost, but as a net positive that the town could benefit from.
Any questions or comments?
Nope, none. Then you raise a great point about sort of planning, right? Like a planner could also help redo the master plan, which was last done in 2005, and a lot of people say there's information. A lot of it hasn't changed. Some of it has changed, but in order to qualify for some of the grants that are out there, you need to have an updated master plan, and that's certainly something that a town planner would help with.
Don't even want to think about rezoning West Upton. Seems like we've had some, quite a few lengthy topics that have come up at annual town meetings in the last few years. It'd be nice to not cross that bridge for a few years.
Yes. But I mean, that's why I think if we had the benefit of a town planner, that person could provide us with pros and cons, with examples from other towns that have tried to do that. We're not, we're a committee of people who have an interest in helping the town. We're not qualified to do the things that, we seem to have to do, unfortunately. And that's why I think in this case, a professional town planner could add a tremendous amount of value.
You do hear an awful lot about complete streets grants, but I never hear anything of when or how they're awarded.
Because we don't have a town planner.
We don't have
Shouldn't we be able to do that?
Well, what we've learned so far is that the Complete Streets program puts a premium on sidewalks that are already existing. If you want to upgrade them to make them ADA compliant, if you want to repair them, those projects seem to get awarded grants ahead of places where sidewalks don't exist, where you'd like to build a new one. So this is, again, why we need a planner to say, look, if you want a sidewalk on Maple Avenue, this is what we need to do. We need to do these 5 things. And if we did those 5 things, perhaps we would be in a better position to get a grant. Because like I said, the price tag to do that sidewalk just kind of blew me away. And as a result, it's not likely that it would ever pass at a town meeting because it's just too expensive. Got more other important things to do. But a town planner could help us figure out how can we get a Complete Streets grant for that? What do we have to do relative to other things? So we don't know that, so we can't make progress on that, something like that.
On that note, I was going to say, I guess the warrant closes February 7th, right?
This Friday, yes.
Yeah. So I guess before the end of the night, we hadn't even planned on talking about, did we have a placeholder in there for engineering on that sidewalk?
Yes.
We do have a placeholder.
We have placeholders for the 2 streets that were requested
That's
for
right.
engineering. Yep.
That's under the DPW, that's right. Okay.
Yep, so those are in for discussion at a later date.
Okay.
I mean,
So I don't have any more questions. Sure.
No, what do I? I'm
No more questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming in, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be there Tuesday night. Yeah, okay. Thanks. So again, moving on with the budget discussion. So that was the big ticket item within the increase of wages, there's also, as pointed out previously, 2% COLA increase for employees, plus any contractual obligations. You will notice, and I'll talk a little bit about it as we get to the detail report, that there is a $6,000 expense for a vehicle stipend that was previously under the town manager's expense line item. For purposes to report to the Department of Revenue, that number had to be moved to the wages expense. So you'll see a net zero, just moving again one line item from one account to another account. Lastly, my commitment has been, since I've been here, to try to really strengthen what we do in human resources. And I think collectively we've been moving in the right direction. I do know that when I first started here that there were many people who had come up to me and said, you got to do a better job in human resources. And so, trying to recognize some concerns, maybe not always valid, but there are concerns out there, perceived or real. We've done just that. And we have changed how we do all of our business in human resources, to everything working with the personnel board and the personnel procedures manual, and basically eliminating the old personnel bylaw, to completing the compensation plan, to a new military leave policy, to CORI policy, so on and so forth. So as we look forward, and both Chief DeFranzo, Kenny, and Chief Bradley have all mentioned it at some point in their talks about personnel, and that we do expect, I would predict in the next 5 years, that all but one department head potentially could retire within the next 5 years. That's just department heads. Any one of them from 1 year out to upwards of 5 years out. That doesn't include a lot of our frontline staff who, we project all of town hall will be completely turned over in less than 10 years. And so, we often talk about what we need to do around long-term capital planning. I know many of you have said to me, we got to look 10 years, 20 years out. We got to think about some of our long-term financial planning and look at our projected growth and our projected revenues. Well, I would argue we need to do the same for our people, right? So what I'm proposing in this year's budget is really only a net increase of $2,000, but to further strengthen our human resources functions, and really put a flag in the ground and saying we're going to have a specific position dedicated towards this. Although I'll say that we've been doing all the work up until this point, but we need to memorialize that moving forward. And so you'll see in this year's budget just a net increase to focus on human resources of $2,000. I will say that the Personnel Board, when I presented this case to them, they encouraged me to come back to you and advocate for more. They didn't think that my request had gone far enough, and I would agree with that. I think if we're really gonna make some headway, in a year from now or 2 years from now, we're gonna have to revisit this conversation about additional staffing. The town of Hopkinton, which is only twice the size of this town, they have 3 full-time equivalents that are just in the Human Resources Department. Right now, this town, which is again half the size, if we were to compare ourselves to Hopkinton, we should have 1.5 FTEs just focused on human resources. There's so much work that goes in there. At the MMA conference this past week, they passed out the Collins Center passed out this document. I only have one copy, and it's really a self-evaluation of what your town does relative to human resources and personnel procedures. And so I plan to continue to focus on that, use that self-evaluation as a check-in as to how well we're doing, and fill the weaknesses where there are weaknesses and strengthen the strengths where there are strengths. So I would hope that we can continue down this positive pathway and support this position. If there are no questions relative to wages, I'm going to move on to expenses, because that's really the lion's share of the increase of this budget. Kenny already talked about, and the pension budget falls within the town manager's office. We're the ones that really kind of manage it for the most part, and there's really not much to manage other than taking the assessment that is given us by Worcester Regional and paying it. But as we already pointed out previously, we have an 11% increase, and we have no control over that, far outpacing our 2.5% that we're able to increase our budget each and every year. Additionally, we've had a lot of public safety turnover in the last, I would say, 12 months. We're projecting the same. And public safety, they take on different medical rigors as far as the onboarding process. So we've increased the medical testing line item by approximately $4,000. And then unfortunately, our legal expense we had received a notice after the budget was approved that KP Law has gone up on the hourly rate from, I believe it was $170 to $180 per hour. And we weren't able to account for that in this past year's budget. So this proposal of increasing the line item by 2.5% accounts for KP's new hourly rate as well. And then there's always the health insurance. We're always grappling with health insurance, working with Maya to try to get better gains on our health insurance returns. And so we plug in every year a conservative number of 10%, knowing that some years it'll be 12% and other years it may be 6%, but always try to plug in that number because we don't typically get back our increases until further on down the budget process. So like schools, we plug in a conservative number knowing that hopefully we'll get better gains once we get the final decision from Maya. So those are the big rocks in the budget. I'm happy to go through all the line item, but I think I covered all the big issues already. There's really nothing else more to discuss as far as increases, other than, we just a marginal increase on our street utility of $2,000. We've continued to run in the red relative to street lighting year after year. It's something that I think at some point in the future, we may want to have a public discussion about purchasing street lights and going to LEDs. There are programs out there that at least suggest that there are considerable savings to doing a program like that. But each and every year, that number continues to climb.
Have we ever realized any of those energy credits that we purchased?
No. We just had a meeting, Bill Taylor and myself met with Constellation Energy, I think it was Constellation, and this is, we're re-engaged Constellation, I'm sorry, it's Colonial Power Group, not Constellation. Colonial Power Group about getting back in the municipal aggregation program. And as you remember, that's a program that the town engages with energy provider like Colonial Power Group, and then the residents benefit from going out to bid in the aggregate on utility costs, in this case electrical utility costs. And so we benefited from year one. We didn't see any gains in year two or year three, so we pulled out of the program. So we're starting to see electricity costs go down, so we're re-engaging them. But to get to your question, that came up. Where is Nexamp? So Nexamp was this solar array company that was supposed to open up here on Milford Street, and I checked in with them about 6-7 months ago, and from what they told me, the DPU still hasn't approved their permit, so they're not even up and running yet. And we were projecting to receive approximately $30,000 a year in energy credits, and those still haven't come to bear. And the reason why I bring up Colonial Power Group, because we asked them, hey, what's going on with this? And they said they're seeing that across the state, that there's a lot of these solar array fields that aren't getting launched because the DPU is really slow on approving their permits. So I will end there and happy to answer any questions.
Do you have anything more?
No, I agree with.
I guess getting back to that last comment you made, the solar array fields are coming online, but the tax credits, what part of the DPU?
No, the Nexamp, the one that was specifically talking about, the one over here in Milford that was approved well over 3 years ago, still has not been energized.
Really?
And we can't receive the energy credits until they energize it. And from what I've been told, that the DPU hasn't issued the permits to allow Nexam to turn that solar array field on.
That's a shame. Interesting.
Every year's another year off the life of those panels doing nothing.
Yeah,
Only good for 20, aren't they?
that's what they always say.
Walking drive. Is this one?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to, yeah. Yeah, Lockett Drive.
There's two there. There's one on Walking Drive, and then there's Harvey's there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Harvey's is up and running, because that's the one we get the pilot from.
Right, I'm talking about one at Nexamp that we signed an agreement to get energy credits.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the one I
So
want
that's
to.
not
That's what I'm
necessarily
talking.
an option now, right?
No, it's in Upton.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have any questions on this.
No,
Good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Okay.
So do we want to approve this as it's written?
Yes, we're not going to talk about the warrant articles for now, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Budget,
that's
I
right.
guess, yeah. I guess on
The one warrant article which is submitted in this budget proposal is the warrant article for engineering costs for Maple Ave.
For the sidewalks.
Right, to engineer the sidewalks, that's right. Given the fact that Dennis is gonna be in front of you at the next meeting, if it's okay, I thought we'd hold off and have that conversation, because there's also another warrant article to engineer the roadway over at Russell Ave. So, we have a lot of money out there right now in warrant articles, between the two roadway engineering costs, and then the chief's request. You know, we're hovering around $500,000 just in those three articles, so. We have about $778,000 left in free cash, so we're gonna have to make some decisions.
But we're going to make those decisions when we talk about the warrant, not when
That's
we're
right.
talking about this.
That's right.
So we're talking about approving this as it is, knowing that we'll talk about the
Not
warrants
the-
later.
That's right, right.
Right.
One quick thing I wanted to add. As far as complete street grants, that particular warrant article regarding the sidewalk on Maple Avenue, I thought I had heard somewhere in the past that sometimes the engineering needs to be complete.
Must be
Before
completed.
you can apply for the grant.
The state will not pay for any engineering costs. They'll pay for construction costs only.
So I guess that was something I wanted to find out, maybe just give Dennis a tip off. That would be something we'd want to talk about, try to understand.
He's
better.
prepared to talk about that, and that's why I'm asking to delay the article conversation, because we had a meeting on Friday to talk about Maple Ave in particular, and he's made some phone calls since then to the state to try to get some more details from them. So, yeah, I think it would be best if he was in the room, we can have those conversations.
That's fine with me?
Good with me.
Good with you? Okay.
So I make a motion that we approve the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager budget as submitted for fiscal year 2021.
Second?
Make that unanimous action? All right. I would like to reopen discussion item 5.1 on appointments. Brett, did you have some?
Yeah,
things regarding
I
that?
believe, Derek, you got an email?
I
At the
did.
beginning of the meeting?
Yeah, so while we were sitting here, I received a response from Mr. David O'Brien, who regrets to inform the board that he is submitting his resignation and no longer can participate in the joint feasibility committee.
If someone would like to make a motion, we can accept that resignation.
I move that we accept David O'Brien's resignation from, so what was the first name of the committee?
Libraries.
Library and
Center
yeah.
Feasibility Committee.
Community Center feasibility.
Okay.
Steering committee.
Second.
Make that unanimous action. Okay, we'll get that taken care of. Recognition. Does anybody have anything under recognition? No?
Not here, no?
Okay. I guess I'll make a quick comment. We did lose one of our longtime citizens. He was a firefighter for many years. Mr. Bob Richards passed away, I believe, about a week and a half ago or so. So certainly someone I remember from all my years in town. So he'll be sorely missed. So on to town manager's report.
I'll just touch on 6 items quickly. So again, focusing on procurement, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow at noontime. We've had a lot of interest from demolition companies after we put out the bid to demo the 6 Main Street property. So I think we've had upwards of 10 to 12 demo companies who did a walkthrough last week with us. Much more interest than the first time we did it. So I'm hopeful that tomorrow at noontime we will get a better number than we previously received of $75,000. Again, hoping we get a good bid response. I've already re-engaged the AG's office, and they are waiting for us to execute a contract so that they could award us the $25,000. So assuming everything goes well tomorrow, and then with the AG's office late this week, early next week, I'm looking forward to report back some positive savings to the town relative to the 6 Main Street demolition. Fowler Street Bridge, those bids were opened this past week, and we got lucky on this one. The lowest bid came just under the $2,000 we've appropriated for this project. So $2,000 under what we appropriated. So yeah, it's going to be tight. Normally, this project for some reason seems like the cost dramatically increasing. As you remember, we've had to go to town meeting a couple of times to make sure we've had enough money for this project, and we're going to go ahead and execute the contract as soon as we can, and hopefully on February 18th we'll come before the board and to get final approvals to go ahead with that project. Additionally, on the same day, we opened up bids for the Kiwanis ramp. As you remember, the Recreation Commission, Andrew St. George in particular, wrote a grant and received a grant award to fund the 100% cost to reconstruct the ramp, the lower ramp over at Kiwanis Beach. And we did get, the lowest bid came in at $13,850. I think the grant award was like $14,500. So again, we just came under the money that was appropriated. Moving positive in those directions. You may be out on Westboro Road, you may have been in the last couple of days, but since the weather's been holding up, you'll notice National Grid and contractors out there trimming back the trees. I know that Chairman Flaherty always talks about the canopy over at Westboro Road, and if we trimmed back the trees, maybe we'd spend less money on salting and sanding. So they're out there doing that, so hopefully we'll see some improvements in winter months to come. And then talking to the Board of Health this morning, a couple of things that are happening. So one, you've all heard about coronavirus. The Board of Health has been engaging the state on daily conference calls to learn more about coronavirus, what it means to the Commonwealth as a whole, and what we should be doing locally to prepare. Right now, obviously, it's not a pandemic, there's no state of emergency, but I just wanted you to know that the Board of Health is paying close attention to that, and if things were to arise, alerts were to be made, rest assured the Board of Health will be notifying us all. And then they just wanted us to know that as of June 1st of this year, all tobacco products that are flavored, so all your grape flavored and your banana flavored tobacco products are going to be banned. So no longer can you buy those in the stores, and it's not age restricted. It's complete ban statewide. So
including menthol, right?
Including menthol, which was a break, and yes, menthol was always the flavored tobacco product that was exempted. Yeah, so even menthol. So again, I personally think, given my background, this is a huge win for the Commonwealth to ban flavored tobacco products, because those of you that don't have kids, you should know that those flavored tobacco products are not made for adults. Those are specifically targeting children to get them addicted to nicotine and be the next generation of nicotine users. So again, that's a big win for public health statewide. So that's my report for tonight.
Great. Good.
Any questions?
I'm busy.
Any questions, Martin?
Good. I'm good. Thank you.
Moving along. All right, recognition, town manager's report. New business. Do you have anything for new business?
Yes. In regards to the negotiations at the school, now generally that's the chairman of the Board of Selectmen that does the negotiations, or the designee of the chairman.
Well, which school are you talking about?
There's two, because he's on the Blackstone Valley
Oh, and I'm
Technical,
on the Mendon Upton Nipmuc.
that's what you're talking about, yeah.
Okay. So you're on the, you've been
No.
appointed?
Oh, this
Okay.
is what I'm telling you. Generally, it's the chairman,
All right.
unless you designate somebody. Represent
When, well,
the rest was me.
when do they want to start? I would think the negotiations have already started.
Is it
or have they
21
not?
days or 45 days?
Yeah, just to give more background and context. So I was approached by the school committee and Dr. Maruschek to participate on the negotiating committee for the Massachusetts Teachers Association and Mendon Upton Regional, or in the town, basically, the schools committee. And so that was the note that I had sent saying, hey, I've been asked to do this, we should talk about it in the meeting. The first contract negotiation meeting was this past week, last Thursday, and I participated in that on behalf of the town. So that was, I knew that you had been participating on the Blackstone Valley Teachers Contract Committee, so that was why I participated in this one. So.
The Blackstone Valley Tech Teachers Committee has not started yet. So I guess the question is...
I'm only the liaison.
Okay. Did you have any interest in serving in that position?
No.
Where you brought it up? Okay.
Just wanted to make it clear. Just to be clear.
To be clear. Okay. And are you comfortable in continuing in that role? Okay. That's fine by me.
Great.
All right.
Do you want to appoint Brett as your designee to the...
I'm trying to think, did we do that last time? Should we need to make
So
a
I'm reading the statute right now. It says the
Right.
chief executive officers or chairman, plural, of boards of selectmen shall elect one of their number to represent them pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 158. So you'd have to make a motion to appoint, in this case, Selectman Simus.
Okay. All right. I make a motion to appoint Selectman Simus as the Board of Selectmen designee to the, is it the bargaining committee?
Mendon Upton Regional School
Mendon
District.
Upton Regional School District negotiating committee.
I'll second.
All right. Make that majority action.
Yes.
All right. Any other new business? New business? All right. I guess then I'd like to take a moment this evening to announce my candidacy for re-election this May. We've got a lot of turnover on the Board of Selectmen. Of course, town manager, we've had 2 new department heads that have come on in the last few years. So I'd like to give some stability to this position, and I would appreciate your support moving forward. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see, look ahead topics. We've kicked these around for a few weeks. We've been pretty busy, so it doesn't seem like, for whatever reason, they don't seem to move up into the agenda, but they're the same ones. The only one that we've added is discussion on earmark funding requests, and that was more or less added on there because we, at some point, need to figure out the request that was made by Janice a few weeks back regarding additional monies.
Oh, for the tax relief?
No, for oil,
Oil.
for the oil relief.
All right.
So that's something, again, we can just talk about that at a later point in time. But I think in the short run, you know, I definitely would like to address the senior tax relief policy. That was, earlier I had kind of mentioned that to Kenny to try to figure out if that can be funded through overlay and what type of language. And if we're interested in doing it, I'm not asking anyone to give an opinion at this point.
I think it normally is funded through the overlay.
Okay.
Anyways, the tax relief and then any of the other relief funds can, you know, donations or...
Okay. You had mentioned that once before, and I wasn't sure, that was my question for Kenny, so I'll send off an email about that. We'll try to determine, I know he has 150 budgeted in that item. It'd be nice to look backwards, maybe 5 years. I think it was 147,000, I think was last year's number. So maybe we'll take a look back 5 years and see typically how much of that gets spent down and have an idea of what we may have available.
You appropriate it then?
It's a recap sheet,
It's on
It is
the
a
recap
recap.
sheet.
Is it recap or overlay?
overlay.
Yeah, it's overlay, but it's, yeah,
So it's part of that.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not an appropriation, it's done off the overlay. You know that.
I know that.
You remembered that, right?
Well, you know, it's coming back to me.
We had our tax classification hearing, I remember him talking about it, so it's always seems to be a point of discussion. So in any event, seeing that we've got that covered, do we have anything under public comment? Any public comment tonight? None?
We just add, you had alluded earlier to recognition. You mentioned Bob Richard. I summoned the events today that Dick Horatio died. He was 92, he was on Fisk Ave. And he was on the finance committee for a long time back in the late 70s and early 80s, so it's just, get to be Maureen and I, and you read the events every day, so.
What was the name?
You know,
That's the first thing I read.
K-A-R-E-Z-I-A, 14 Fisk Ave.
I missed one a few months ago, actually. I think, can't remember his first name. Mr. Amato from Amato's Farm was on the historical for many, many years. And of course, a longtime town resident. So we kind of missed him somehow. So unfortunately, time moves along and we're losing a lot of the, the old founding fathers I like to think of as of the town.
We're not far behind, are we?
Speak for yourself.
Just saying.
All right. Any other public comment? All right. Seeing none, the board is going to adjourn only to reconvene in executive session. We need to enter executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section number 21, Exemption number 6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the body. Steve Mattelli and I think we have to do a roll call to enter at the meeting, do we?
We do.